This video covers every country outside the US that we know about in the Fallout series. Every mention, every little reference, it's all here. From there, we dive into every state within the US that has any scrap of lore attached to it, even down to a name on an envelope. After that, we'll move on to the big pre-war cities, Chicago, Reno, Los Angeles, where we'll focus on only the most significant lore, skipping the throwaway references and getting straight to the meat. Finally, we'll wrap up with the post-war settlements, the communities built after the bombs fell. All of this packed into one video. Thanks for watching, and if you're a Fallout fan, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing because we've got a hell of a lot more coming your way. Enjoy the vid, guys. Australia existed as both a country and continent before the Great War. Like most of the world, it didn't make it out unscathed. Whatever happened, it was hit just as hard. While we don't know a ton about post-war Australia, there are a few small references to it across the Fallout series. In Fallout 76, the Pioneer Scouts Camp's entomologist badge exam brings up something called the four-legged Australian termite beetle. Another exam, the one for mammalogists, points out that Australia is home to marsupials, and that red foxes weren't originally part of the ecosystem there. And in the Fallout TV series, the Australian flag shows up in the episode of Vault Cellar's survival guide called Step on the Gas. So while it hasn't been mentioned a lot, and specifically post-war, Australia's definitely been name dropped here and there. My personal hope is that it's Mad Max style there. It just has to be. We only have a small piece of information on Austria. It only really gets a mention in Fallout Tactics, where it's tied to a pre-war weapon, the Steyr assault rifle. According to the in-game description, the Steyr was invented in Austria and stood out for its unique design and visual style. It was basically considered a solid choice for any soldier's loadout back in the day. And that's about it for Austria and Fallout. Just a brief nod through a weapon's origin, but it is good to know that they were still known for fine weapons even in the Fallout universe. The Bahamas. In Fallout 4, we find out that Vivian Odell, who managed the Boston branch of Hubris Comics, took a trip there in October 2077, right before the bombs dropped. And in the Fallout TV series, there's a poster for Nassau, which is the capital, hanging in Chet's kitchen in Vault 33. That same poster shows up in the episodes The Ghouls and The Past. The Bahamas gets a couple of subtle shoutouts. Belgium still gets a few shoutouts in Fallout Tactics. Two pre-war weapons, the Browning high-power pistol and the M249 saw, both trace their roots back to Belgium. The Browning was originally made there, and the M249 saw was a Belgian-designed light machine gun that saw widespread use in the late 20th century. There's also a weird bit of trivia involving Mr. House, specifically that of H&H Tools. He apparently had an irrational hatred for Flemish people and would fire any employee who even talked to one. The terminal entry is talking about the security systems and how House wants it to run. I won't read all of it, but I'll give you the little snippet that talks about the Flemish. Also, the Flemish thing is confusing to me. I tried to kind of figure out what it means, but the main reason Flemish has a separate name is that it's Dutch that is spoken outside the Netherlands, in the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium called Vlaanderen, or Flanders, aka Flemish. Basically, all people from Belgium are Belgians, but not all Belgians are Flemish, I think. Anyways, enough of that. Here's the entry. Any employee seen to be cohabitating, colluding, or cogitating with any of the following groups will be terminated immediately. Foreigners, Masons, Carpenters, Tragic Players, Illegal Aliens, Extraterrestrials, or the Flemish. Like, holy shit. Who knew Mr. House was like this? Kind of blew my mind reading this terminal entry. Everyone knows that this will be a good-sized one. You could argue that we should have put it in our states video. Before the Great War, Canada was its own country, but things didn't stay that way for long. By June 3rd, 2072, it had been officially annexed by the United States. To Americans, it became known as Little America or the Big 51, mostly because of its rich natural resources, especially timber and oil. The US started leaning on Canada way back in 2059 when they built the Anchorage front line to protect Alaska's resources from China. Since some of the pipeline ran through Canada, American troops started showing up for security. But after China invaded Alaska in 2066, the US presence in Canada ramped up big time. That led to riots, protests, and rising tensions, especially as American forces weren't just guarding the pipeline. They were stripping the country for all it had. By 2069, huge swaths of forests were wiped out, and Canada was basically being treated as US property. Things boiled over in 2072. After a failed attempt to sabotage the pipeline and a wave of unrest, the US used the chaos as an excuse to fully annex Canada. Commander Buzz Babcock said it was all about the security and claimed that Little America had always belonged to the US anyway. By the time 2077 rolled around, Canada as a nation was gone. The American military was running the show, and Canadian provinces were just US territories, which were under military control but not officially states. Resistance movements sprang up and the US cracked down hard. People were arrested, shot on sight, and even executed on camera. American propaganda painted Canadian partisans like the Yukon 5 as villains in comics and cartoons, those like Armor Ace and Power Patrol. Vault-Tec jumped on the opportunity too, advertising vaults in the newly annexed Canada. Not everyone in the US military was on board. Some thought the annexation was flat out wrong. Open fighting broke out, especially in the Yukon, which became another front in the resource wars alongside Alaska. Still, the US pushed forward, pushing out media that made it look like a heroic liberation while demonizing Canadian fighters. Even after the bombs dropped, some Canadians moved south into former US territory, some looking for better opportunities, others following trade routes from places like New California. We know this because in Fallout 2, the Chosen One is having a conversation with a woman named Marge LaBarge. They ask Marge if they're a Redding native, and Marge responds by saying, "Heck no. I was born way up north, right on the edge of a lake. Lake LaBarge it was." Lake LaBarge is of course in Canada. So we know that this lady was able to travel through post-war Canada clear to California. Canada also pops up in a bunch of different ways throughout the Fallout games, even if it's just in the background or as a side reference. For starters, when Danielle Faye's stolen car was recovered, a Canadian flag was found inside. In Fallout New Vegas, Cass cracks a joke about Jean-Baptiste Cutting's name, saying it sounds Canadian. Canada also shows up on the terminal of a fed-up soldier named Jackie, though it's once again just a passing mention. At the Pioneer Scout camp in Fallout 76, there's a test where Canada is one of the wrong answers to the question, which country built the first major railway system? And if you poke around Sunset Sarsarilla's headquarters, you'll find a poster showing sales data including figures for Canada. In Fallout 3, there's even a 5% chance you'll find a letter in a mailbox addressed to someone who didn't make it into a vault. That letter lists newly annexed Canada as a possible resettlement option. In Fallout 76's Locked and Loaded update, Canada gets another nod. One of the villains, the Quebec Claw, is part of the Yukon 5, which was that group that was meant to villainize Canadian resistant fighters. And Fallout Tactics has a whole set of weird random encounters tied to Canada. One is called the Canadian Invasion Recreationists, where a character named Clarice tells a group to stand on the American side of the line, then walk to the Canadian side, and then celebrate by getting drunk. She also insists there's strong historical evidence that Canadian soldiers wore pink for some reason. Another encounter features a group who's flat out hostile, yelling Canadian scum and claiming Canada started the Great War. If you fight them, they shout out things like, "We invaded your country once and we'll do it again." One final Tactics encounter shows two Canadian resistance groups, the CPF and the PFC. They're arguing over what Canada's future should be. Both groups fly flags with different versions of the maple leaf. And in concept art for Project V13, which was a cancelled Fallout game, Vancouver shows up in the background with ads for its SkyTrain and C-Bus systems. But obviously this is non-canon. And also everything from Tactics can be considered iffy on canon-wise, so just keep that in mind. Lastly, Canada was actually planned as a full location in Fallout Extreme, which was an action game that never saw the light of day. Hopefully I got the majority of references for Canada. The cool part is that we got a little information of post-war Canada, but I definitely think it could be a cool place to visit in a game or a DLC. Plus, Bethesda can't use the excuse that it's not in the US, because in the Fallout universe, it is. Also, I'm not completely ignorant to the timing of all this and the real world. Sorry if it's a sensitive topic. I just want to preface this real quick by saying some of these names and stuff I might get wrong, so don't crucify me in the comments. But buckle up, because this is a big one, and right after Canada, which is kind of crazy. Before the bombs fell, China, which was known officially as the People's Republic of China, was one of the biggest global powers and the main rival of the United States. Founded in 1949 by Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party, it grew into a totalitarian socialist state that stuck to the Maoist ideology all the way into the 21st century. Its capital was Beijing, and its military power came from the People's Liberation Army and the Chinese Intelligence Ministry. By the time the Fallout timeline really diverged, China had become one of the last remaining superpowers alongside the US and what was left of the Soviet Union. But while China expanded by annexing nearby countries to stay afloat, it couldn't escape the global energy crisis. As fossil fuels dried up, China struggled to keep up with the demand, especially once the Middle East oil fields ran dry in 2060, triggering massive instability worldwide. China leaned heavily on oil, uranium, and other natural resources. And when those started running low, things spiraled fast. The tipping point came in 2066, when trade talks with the US collapsed over oil. China had discovered a deep-sea reserve of petroleum under the Pacific, but suspected sabotage, likely American, kept them from tapping into it. At the same time, the US made a big show of debuting its first working fusion power cell, which only made things worse for China. Desperate for resources and with few options left, Chairman Chiang launched a full-scale invasion of Alaska. The plan was simple: take the oil by force. This kicked off the Sino-American War, and the battle for Anchorage became the focal point of the conflict. China poured troops into the region, hoping to establish a land bridge or at least a strong enough hold to pressure the US. But they ran into the first wave of American power armor, which stopped their advances cold. The war turned into a trench warfare, brutal, drawn out, and with no real movement on either side. It dragged on for over a decade. While all of this was going on, the US used the situation to pressure Canada into letting its military pass through, which, as we know, that eventually led to the US annexing Canada. Meanwhile, China ramped up its espionage and sabotage within the US, planting agents across North America to disrupt military operations and gather intel. Some of those operatives included characters like these, many of whom show up in different Fallout games. At the same time, the US stoked paranoia at home, launching another Red Scare. The government pushed anti-communist propaganda hard and even encouraged citizens to rat out neighbors for anything suspicious. They set up the Vigilant Citizens Hotline for this exact purpose. China didn't just rely on military strength either. It also turned to biological warfare. In response, the US gave Westech a contract to develop a universal cure, which that eventually led to the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or the FEV. So while the war over resources was front and center, it was also a breeding ground for the kind of experiments that would define the wasteland later on. Despite heavy losses, resource shortages, and crumbling infrastructure, China never gave in. By the time the Great War hit in 2077, the country had officially ceased to exist. But its legacy lingered. The Chinese military was still feared, their tech was still advanced, and their operatives like Captain Zhao and General Jing Wei remained active in some form long after the bombs fell. In Fallout, China is referenced across multiple titles, including Fallout 3, New Vegas, Fallout 4, 76, Tactics, Shelter, and Operation Anchorage. In fact, the entire Anchorage simulation in Operation Anchorage is built around the US pushing Chinese forces out of Alaska. And just to poke fun at how much is lost after the war, Fallout 3's Moira Brown even has a terminal entry wondering if China was ever real at all. It says, "What happened to China? Reports uncertain. China may be fictional." Even though the US claimed it was just defending itself, things escalated in 2074 when American troops actually invaded mainland China. Infantry and mechanized divisions were deployed across the region, but despite their strength, the US ran into serious problems. The war had already been going on for years across multiple fronts: Alaska, Canada, and now China. And America's economy was stretched thin. Supply lines couldn't keep up, and troops got bogged down trying to push through Chinese defenses. By 2076, the war had been dragging on for over a decade. Both sides were exhausted with no end in sight. That changed when the US rolled out the T-51 power armor in June of that year. It fixed all of the problems the older models had. And once American mechanized units were equipped with the T-51B suits, that tide started to turn. These armored troops tore through Chinese forces in both Alaska and mainland China, giving the US a much needed upper hand. On the Chinese side, things were falling apart fast. Their economy collapsed under the strain, and support from nearby countries they had annexed started drying up. The US wasn't in great shape either. By August, there were food and energy riots breaking out in major American cities. Martial law was declared and US troops were deployed domestically to deal with the unrest. Then came 2077. On January 10th, the Battle of Anchorage ended with a solid American win. Chinese forces pulled back and the US regained control of the area. With Alaska secured and Chinese supply lines in ruins, the US started shifting its military focus entirely toward crushing the last of China's resistance. The T-51B armor gave American forces a massive edge in this final push. Realizing how fragile the situation was, US leadership started prepping for the worst. Key figures and elite personnel went underground into shelters, just in case nuclear retaliation was on the table. Military bases across the country sealed themselves off, while active troops stayed deployed to keep the offensive going. Barely. At that point, both countries were hanging on by a thread. The war had gone on too long, and when the Great War finally came, it ended everything in an instant. It all came crashing down on October 23, 2077. In just 2 hours, the world as everyone knew it was wiped out. The US and China, once global superpowers, were reduced to ash in a massive nuclear exchange. Cities vanished in firestorms, sirens wailed one last time, and the vault sealed shut for good. According to what was left of the American government, China had been knocked back to the Stone Age, though there wasn't much of America left either. But not everything Chinese disappeared in the blast. In fact, some of what survived did so right in the heart of what used to be the US. Take Appalachia, for example. After the bombs dropped, Chinese PLA agents from the Fujinaya intelligence base scattered into the surrounding population. Some ended their lives on the spot. Others, especially the more hardcore loyalists, kept fighting their secret war long after the world had already ended. A few even became ghouls, still clinging on to that mission decades later. For some, the war was seen as the ultimate proof that America's imperialist ambitions had failed. Survivors like Agent Mo Shao didn't just disappear. They kept operating, hunting down defectors and anyone that they thought had turned their back on the cause, even 25 years after the bombs had fell. Some remnants managed to last even longer. As late as the 23rd century, Chinese holdouts were still alive in places like a fortified safe house hidden in the ruins of Washington, D.C. Over in San Francisco, survivors from a beached Chinese submarine joined forces with the locals after the war. That group eventually evolved into the Shi, one of the most technologically advanced factions in New California. They weren't just surviving, they were rebuilding. Most wastelanders, though, don't bump into ancient Chinese agents. What they do find are the leftovers of that war, Chinese weapons and gear scattered across the wasteland. Things like Type 93 assault rifles, Type 17 pistols, officer swords, encrypted radios, and training manuals from Chinese special ops. Some of it comes from infiltration efforts. Other pieces were just war trophies brought home by US soldiers before the world ended. China's military might before the Great War was built on sheer numbers and firepower. The People's Liberation Army leaned on its industrial strength and massive manpower reserves, but it didn't match the US when it came to personal protection. Chinese troops were typically issued basic jumpsuits, not heavy armor, but they made up for that with firepower. Their standard weapon, the Type 93 assault rifle, packed a much harder punch than the American R91. Tanks were central to China's strategy, especially during the invasion of Alaska. But once the US brought out early power armor, Chinese forces did find themselves at a disadvantage. With no real equivalent, they rushed to develop their own powered armored tech. Since they couldn't catch up in time, they shifted focus to something else: stealth. China heavily invested in stealth technology, and it paid off. They developed the stealth suits, which let their operatives slip behind enemy lines with ease. These suits were so effective that by 2075, China was rumored to have built an entire fleet of stealth submarines, nicknamed the Ghost Fleet. They didn't stop there. Chinese intelligence was a serious business. Covert networks of spies were set up all over the US, especially around Washington, D.C. They even maintained stealth patrols via submarines. Their operations were quiet but far-reaching. And while they struggled to produce power armor that could match America's, their stealth research outpaced everyone else. US efforts to keep up mostly relied on reverse engineering Chinese tech. Big Mountain had developed early stealth suits based on captured gear, and companies like Robco tried to replicate the stealth field modulation. That eventually led to inventions like the Stealth Boy, portable cloaking devices that didn't require full-body suits. Later, the Enclave would salvage a pre-war stealth upgrade from the Project Intelligence base in Appalachia, which they used to create the Stealth Boy Mark III. In Fallout Tactics, China is credited with designing the MEC Gauss minigun, an insane weapon that fires 2mm EC rounds at over 90,000 rounds per minute. It's wild stuff, but again, it might not be part of the mainline canon. Post-war, we don't know much about China the country, but we do have the remnants of the Chinese soldiers, weapons, and armor lying around. Mama Dolce's factory in the capital wasteland was a Chinese spy front before the bombs fell, and now when you visit it, there's still Chinese soldiers turned ghouls running the place. The Yangsha 31 is a Chinese stealth submarine from the Yangsha class. It was part of the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy and ran on nuclear power. Commanding the vessel was Captain Zhao, who we eventually meet in Fallout 4. Right before the Great War kicked off, the Yangsha was out on deployment, carrying a serious payload. 6 strategic nuclear warheads, along with an unknown number of smaller tactical nukes and torpedoes. When the order came down, Zhao followed through. He launched nearly all the strategic missiles, and only one failed to fire. Not long after launching its payload, the sub hit a mine. The explosion tore into its reactor, causing a leak and disabling the sub. With no way to move and radiation flooding the interior, the Yangsha 31 drifted into Boston Harbor, where it stayed. Most of the crew either died from radiation exposure or became feral ghouls. Captain Zhao survived and became a regular ghoul, becoming the last living remnant of his crew. You can actually help fix the ship, and Zhao will supposedly leave back to his homeland. The truth is, we could go on and on about China, and maybe we did. It is by far the biggest lore dump country in the entire game, but I think we covered the majority of it, and it's probably going to take up half this video. The Congo was a country in Africa before the Great War. It doesn't play a major role in the series, but it does give us a few scattered mentions across different games. One of the more well-known references is in the classic song Civilization, which plays on Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3. It also plays in Diamond City Radio Fallout 4 and Appalachia Radio Fallout 76. The song includes a lyrical mention of the Congo. Obviously, I can't play the song because of copyright stuff, but there it is. In Far Harbor, there's a display plaque in Vault 118 claiming that Ezra Parker saved a Congolese tribe. As a thank you, the tribe supposedly gave him a collection of pygmy skulls. Problem is, the whole story's nonsense. There are no tigers in Africa, and the pygmy skulls on display are just plastic props. The plaque is basically another example of Parker being a fraud and a con man. There's also a brief mention of the Congo in Fallout 76 when it shows up in a love note. Bet you never thought that there'd be so many mentions of the Congo in Fallout. Czechia doesn't appear directly in any Fallout game, but it does get a few mentions in Fallout Tactics and a subtle nod in the Fallout TV series. One of the clearer references is the Cellier and Bellow ammo found in the Vault 33's armory. These 9mm rounds were produced by a real-world Czech company, and the box even features the Czech coat of arms, a crowned double-tailed silver lion. That same ammo box shows up in the Fallout TV show, suggesting that Czech-made weapons and gear were still being used around the time the bombs fell. In Fallout Tactics, there's another connection. The Bren gun, which was originally a Czech design before being adapted by the British. The game acknowledges this in the weapon's description. Also, you have the modern Czech coat of arms in the TV show, instead of one tied to the communist era Czechoslovakia, which implies that the dissolution of Czechoslovakia, which happened in our timeline in 1993, still happened at some point before the bombs dropped in the Fallout universe. That's pretty interesting. Egypt was a pre-war country in Africa, and like in real world, it was known for its ancient history and iconic landmarks like the pyramids of Giza and the Nile River. In the Fallout universe, Egypt shows up in references across Fallout 2, 4, 76, and the TV show. Agatha's radio plays compositions from Egypt's classical legacy. And quiz questions in the Pioneer Scouts exams cover Egyptian topics like scarab beetles and papyrus. The renewal religion uses the Ankh, an ancient Egyptian symbol, as its logo. Even pre-war Hollywood got in on the Egyptian craze, with a film called Empire on the Nile, referenced in Fallout 76. And according to a Vault Seller Survival Guide episode, the pyramids still stood long enough to show up in pre-war promotional media. I wish we had more than some of these references on Egypt, but this is where we're at. Ethiopia shows up briefly in Fallout 76, specifically through a mention on Appalachia Radio. The reference comes during the Wastelanders update when the song In a Shanty in Old Shanty Town plays. After the track finishes, the radio host Julie chimes in and casually drops a bit of trivia. And that's the extent of Ethiopia's presence in the series for now. Like much of the European Commonwealth, France was hit hard by global resource crisis in the years leading up to the Great War. By 2060, the oil fields in the Middle East had dried up, and France, along with its neighbors, were left scrambling for what little remained. The Commonwealth eventually fractured into independent states locked in conflict, and what became of France after the bombs dropped is still unknown.
And the European Commonwealth would dissolve into quarreling, bickering nation-states, bent on controlling the last remaining resources on Earth.
There are hundreds of references to France in Fallout, but none that really explain anything that happened post-war. I'll give you a few just because that's what we're doing in this video, but just know that there's a lot more out there and it's all pretty minor stuff. This perk from New Vegas uses a well-known French saying, and in Dead Money, Dean Domino mentions having performed in Paris. French language and culture are found in several characters as well. Curie in Fallout 4 speaks with a French accent and uses various French expressions.
Why can't you just leave?
I require verbal or written authorization. Actually, any Vault-Tec employee, even you, could authorize me.
Andre Michaud, who appears in Far Harbor, also speaks French while he's wounded. Fallout 76 includes even more references, like a Miss Nanny using French during a story, and a Liberty Bell replica is noted as having been cast in France. There's also a bunch of other small references that are pretty unimportant for the most part. And that's about it. So we don't know a lot about France, but its culture still seems to be leaking into the wasteland 200 years later. After the divergence, Germany struggled through resource shortages and political fallout. By 2060, the European Commonwealth had basically collapsed, and Germany was caught in a conflict with neighboring countries over dwindling resources. Regardless, German technology still made its way across the globe. A bunch of energy weapons that survived the Great War were originally designed by German engineers and can still be found in post-apocalyptic US. In Fallout and Fallout 2, several weapons like the PPK-12 Gauss pistol, the M72 Gauss rifle, and the Vindicator minigun are noted as German-made. Many of them were developed by the arms manufacturer Heckler & Koch, including the G11 series, the MP9, and the KAWS shotgun. These games also show images of historic German sites like Berlin and the Ludendorff Bridge during their intros, tying Germany to the larger narrative of global conflict before the bombs dropped. Fallout 3 includes Stanislaus Braun, the overseer of Vault 112. He was originally from Germany.
Do you realize what you've done? You've triggered the failsafe, ruined everything. The subjects will die and I'll be stuck here in this hell alone.
You ruined everything! Everything!
You'll also hear music from German composers like Bach. They show up on GNR and Agatha's Station. In Fallout 4, the game's classical radio features more German composers like Brahms and Wagner. Nuka World also throws in a nod to Dusseldorf, mentioned in Wixon's Shovel Museum. Fallout 76 expands this even more with Helvetia, a town celebrating German heritage through a festival. The town features German food, music, signs, and even a painting with a German saying. And then you have characters like Hugo Stoltz, who's the Vault 63 overseer. He clearly comes from German-speaking backgrounds. Germany even shows up in Fallout Tactics and Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, mostly through references like Volkswagen and Heckler & Koch weapons. I tagged it as mostly mentions because most of it is mentions, but knowing that German engineers were making energy weapons that made it to the US is a cool fact. Fallout makes a bunch of subtle and not so subtle references to ancient Greece through names and dialogue. The Archimedes system and Euclid's Sea Finder are both tied to legendary Greek mathematicians, and the names actually reflect what the tech does. Characters like Macready and Ingram joke about the Trojan horse or Greek-sounding tech, and Fallout 76 even has an audio tour that name drops Poseidon, which connects to Poseidon Energy. Of course, the Pioneer Scout exams throw in trivia about Greek inventions like the ballista and historic events like the Greek Dark Ages. Sophia also references the myth of Arachne and Athena during one of her side stories. Greek mythology shows up all over the place, especially in names for items, robots, and factions. You'll see references to gods like Hades, Zeus, and Hermes, and mythical creatures like the Gorgon and Centaurs. Of course, there's also Underworld and the three-headed guard dog Cerberus, who's just a Mr. Handy. Lots of stuff about Greek mythology or Greece is everywhere, but nothing about it after the bombs fell, or before for that matter, because of course not. Greenland shows up a couple times in the Fallout series, but only in passing. It's described as a large island off the northeast coast of Canada. In Fallout 4, Deacon from the Railroad casually mentions that he once spent a few months sailing across the ocean and even made it as far as Greenland. He doesn't go into detail, he just says it was a wild story and promises to tell us more later. And then he never does, the bastard. Plus, he's always lying anyways, so who knows. Greenland also shows up visually in Fallout 3. It can be seen on one of the world maps used in a loading screen. But again, there's no deeper lore or location tied to it. India doesn't have a huge spotlight in the Fallout series. In Fallout 2, there's a terminal on the Enclave oil rig that notes it's playing an Indian movie, though the character using it complains that the film is boring. Meanwhile, in New Vegas, there's a patch on a boomer flight suit that represents the China-Burma-India theater from World War II. Then you have some references from the Fallout 76 scout badges like we talked about before, and the Fallout TV show that shows a flag.
Stay the fuck out of me business, don't go where you don't belong, and buy your drinks here. That's all you need to know.
Ireland was part of the European Commonwealth before the bombs fell, and it's mentioned fairly often. Before the Great War, Ireland had a close connection to the US, thanks to generations of Irish immigrants settling mostly along the East Coast. This influence is especially noticeable in Fallout's version of Boston, where Irish-American culture still exists in everything from landmarks to organized crime. Fallout doesn't clearly explain what happened to Ireland after the war, but there's a strong hint in Fallout 3. Colin Moriarty, the saloon owner in Megaton, was born in post-war Ireland. That suggests some form of civilization survived there, even if the details are left vague. Irish heritage and culture continue to show up in various ways across the games. Fallout 4 leans heavily into this with areas like Irish Pride Industries and the Shamrock Tap House, as well as characters like Kate, who speaks with a thick Irish accent. Eddie Winter's holotapes mention the Irish mob and even reference trips to Ireland. There are whiskey bottles labeled in Gaelic, the Luck bobblehead decked out in clovers, and Old Longfellow in Far Harbor sings Irish folk tunes. It's not much, but between the cultural references and characters like Moriarty, it's fair to assume that Ireland might be damaged, but not destroyed. It still exists in some form post-nuclear world.
Now, get the fuck out of my face.
Italy's impact on Fallout's world mostly comes from its people, culture, and crime families that made their way to the US before the bombs dropped. Two siblings, Quintino and Concerto Lombardi, immigrated from a small village near Naples and went on to establish the Lombardi crime family in Atlantic City. Some pieces of Italian history survived the bombs too. One example is the Soil Stradivarius, which is a rare violin made by Antonio Stradivari in the 1700s. It was preserved inside Vault 92, and it may be one of the last of its kind. In Fallout 4, Eddie Winters references dealings with the Italian mob. There are also mentions of Italian culture like the Statue of David and Sicilian espresso machines. In Fallout 76, you'll come across Italian-themed diners and archaeology exam questions that reference Pompeii and Sicily. One character, Giuseppe, is an Italian immigrant who still feels a strong connection to his homeland, and he wonders what became of it after the war, which is probably the only mention of what happened to Italy after the war by a character. And like him, we're also wondering. I imagine Italy post-war as like the old world mafia Italy. That would be awesome. Japan's influence stretches back centuries in Fallout's alternate history. One of the weirdest examples is Toshiro Kago, a samurai from the late 1500s who was abducted by aliens and put in cryosleep aboard Mothership Zeta. He wakes up in Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta DLC, still searching for his sword. In terms of modern history, Japan was involved in World War II just like in real life. The Fallout universe references the attack on Pearl Harbor, the US building the Sierra Army Depot as a defense measure, and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with Little Boy and Fat Man. These events show up in the in-game museums and dialogue, mostly in Fallout 4's Museum of Freedom. After the bombs fell, Japanese culture didn't just disappear. In Fallout 2, descendants of the Yakuza, which are the Japanese mafia, still roam near New Reno. They're fighting other gangs and wielding traditional weapons. Food culture also survived. Margaret Primrose in Fallout 3 finds an old sushi cookbook and tries to recreate recipes with Mirelurk meat. Weapons like the katana and throwing stars have made their way back into the post-war hands, and you'll occasionally run into references to Japanese tech. One example is the Takahashi, the Protectron noodle vendor in Diamond City. He only says this.
Friggin' hole.
Do yourself a favor and just say yes. It's all he understands.
What are you saying? Yes?
But Curie can recognize it and respond to him in Japanese, so maybe his programming might still include more than he lets on. There are also several characters throughout the games with Japanese names or backgrounds. The Nakano family in Far Harbor, Paladin Sato from the Brotherhood, Grandma Junko, and a few residents of Appalachia also have Japanese names. And of course, there's Toshiro Kago, who's probably the most direct tie to Japan's historical presence in the entire series. Fallout also mirrors some real-world history through its alternate timeline. The internment of Chinese Americans during the Sino-American War is a nod to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. In Fallout, it was done through Executive Order 99066, clearly referencing the real-life Executive Order 9066. It seems to me that Japan in the Fallout timeline is the most affected country divergently, which makes it pretty interesting. In the years leading up to 2077, Mexico was hit hard by both natural disasters and outside pressure, especially from the US. A major earthquake struck Mexico City in 2042, and the widespread damage helped boost sales of Mr. Handy robots for cleanup. But by 2051, things got worse. The United States, citing political instability and environmental concerns, put economic pressure on Mexico to gain more control over its oil. That eventually led to US military occupation of key areas like the Chincotepec oil fields, especially in Veracruz, Hidalgo, and Puebla. Companies like Poseidon Energy use subsidiaries like PetroChico to operate these fields, branding it as a friendly partnership, but it was really just corporate exploitation. Mexican media wasn't totally silent though. A tabloid-style magazine ran stories on US elites, including rumors about Robert House. So even with all the chaos, people were still keeping tabs on what was happening north of the border. During the Great War, Mexico City was heavily bombed and reduced to ruins, though it might not have been hit as badly as some major US targets. What followed though was total societal collapse. Looters took over the capital and gradually turned into early raider gangs. Survivors tried to flee the destruction. Some made it into the US, reaching places like Zion Canyon in Utah or even New Vegas. The country's environment took a massive hit as well. Radiation and chemical waste from American facilities, including waste drifting down from the control station enclave in California, contaminated Mexico's coastlines. Beaches were wrecked, sea life was mutated, and new wildlife like bighorners and night stalkers became common by 2280s. By the 23rd century, the new California Republic expanded into Baja California. It didn't go well. Several characters in Fallout have Mexican ancestry, or at least connections to Mexico. Raul Tejada and his sister Rafaela are originally from Mexico and fled after the bombs dropped. Raul's backstory in New Vegas gives a detailed look at what post-war Mexico was like: radioactive ruins, early raider gangs, and life as a scavenger. It sounds fairly similar to more of the worst places hit in the US, places like the Pit or the Divide. Not fun. Others like Big Jesus Mordino or Lil Jesus Mordino and Rudy Fernandez also trace back to Mexican origins. Mexico is one of the few places where we actually get some information post-war. It makes it super unique to all the other places, and I hope in the future we start to get more information like this. Post-war, Mongolia's influence shows up more through raider gangs inspired by its history. The Khans and New Khans factions came out of Vault 15 and took inspiration from the Mongol Empire. By the time of Fallout New Vegas, they've evolved into the Great Khans, and their whole thing is rooted in the Mongol-style tribal structure. One character even mentions finding a book called Pretty Pretty Horsies, a history of the Mongol Empire, which is what helped shape their entire identity. The idea for the Khans was loosely inspired by a real-life biker gang called the Mongols. Fallout devs wanted to create a tough, nomadic group that felt like it could survive in the harsh world of the wasteland. Mongolia was also planned to appear in the cancelled Fallout Extreme, where it would have been home to a raider faction called the Huns. It's tough to put Mongolia as a mention only because the Khans are so relevant, but we have no information on the country pre or post-war, so there you have it. The wreck of the FMS Northern Star in Fallout 4 has a strong connection to Norway, mainly through the language spoken by the raiders on board. These raiders who have become ghouls don't speak English like most enemies in the game. Instead, they shout phrases in Norwegian when encountered, such as even when they're killed, the others might shout other phrases being sad about it, or when dying they might say this. This means I'm coming home. At least from what I could find, it's either a mention to Norway specifically, or maybe something like the afterlife. This consistent use of Norwegian implies that the ship and its crew were likely from Norway prior to the Great War. But even though they speak this, the ship's terminals are written entirely in English. This is never explained and might simply be just a gameplay convenience. But it does stand out given the crew's Norwegian background. Also, some of the Norwegian subtitles in the game contain errors or just weird phrasing. Just know it's not perfect, and the people who speak the language pointed that out to me in a different video. That's all we have on Norway, but it's pretty cool to see the people from the actual country in the game. According to Lorenzo Cabot's journal, he once traveled to Salalah, which is a city in Oman. It's a really small reference, but I had to bring it up. In Fallout 3, there's a location called the Meresti Metro Station. According to Justin, one of the characters there, the station was named after a town in Romania. He says Vance told him it was way across the ocean, in a place called Romania. And of course it's mentioned in 76 during that scout exam as well. Is every damn country mentioned in that damn thing? The Soviet Union, also known as the USSR, was still around before the Great War, but by 2077, it wasn't the major threat it once was. China had pretty much taken over that role in the eyes of the US. Even though the USSR was still viewed as a rival, relations had gotten a bit more stable compared to the Cold War era. The Soviet Union first came to be after the 1917 revolution. Later, the Soviets and China both pushed back against the US claim that Captain Carl Bell was the first human in space, because Fallout's version of history rewrites some major space race milestones. As tensions shifted, China became the bigger concern for the US, especially leading up to that Sino-American War. Still, the US lumped China and the USSR together as a communist threat. Analysts even consider a joint first strike from both countries as a real possibility. The Soviets also did human mutation experiments, which supposedly influenced some of the US military's more questionable research projects. Despite the political attention, there were signs of cooperation by 2077. A Soviet diplomat was living in Vault 13 during the war, meaning they were trusted enough to survive the bombs. Soviet weapons like the AK-112 were imported and ended up all over post-war California. The Soviet Union is referenced across the series: Fallout, Fallout 3, New Vegas, Fallout 4, 76, Tactics, and even the Fallout TV show. You also catch various in-world references: Soviet-style propaganda, posters mocking communism, old Russian vodka brands like Surkov in Fallout 4 and 76, and a Catch the Commie board game poking fun at Cold War paranoia. Behind the scenes, Fallout's creators originally steered away from using the USSR as the US's main enemy. They felt it didn't feel like a serious global threat anymore and leaned into China instead. That decision was partly based on personal experience. One developer recalled a moment in Moscow involving the Russian mob and gunfire during a call, which helped him realize how much of the Soviet Union had changed by the modern era. At one point, there were even plans for a Soviet spy subplot in Fallout 76's Wild Appalachia update. It would have involved the Soviet Mr. Handy and a secret training program called Mission Accessible, but that was scrapped before release. Spain had a long history as a global empire, driven by conquest and the search for gold, something Ron Perlman even points out in the Fallout intro when he says,
Spain built an empire from its lust for gold and territory.
Pre-war, Spain was still a known and visited place. Dean Domino from Dead Money references getting caught up in a mess in Madrid, and says it might have been even worse than what he went through at the Sierra Madre. There's also some small references throughout the games of places in Spain and things like that, but nothing I really thought needed to be on the list. I did think it was pretty cool that we had some small info on Spain pre-war. If you've watched this far, then you know that that's pretty rare. In Fallout 3, Three Dog makes a joke about a vault possibly leading to Switzerland, which means that whole idea of Swiss neutrality seems to have stuck around in the post-apocalyptic world. There's also a few other mentions scattered around the games. The P220 Sig Sauer is described as a Swiss-designed pistol. There's also a simulation set in the Swiss Alps in the Tranquility Lane files. By the time the Predictive Analytic Machine, or PAM, came online in 2067, the Taiwan Strait was going through some serious instability. This was triggered by something called the Pascal Incident. Using early version of PAM's code, analysts were able to predict the best moves to calm the situation down, and surprisingly, those predictions actually worked. While that's not the only direct mention of Taiwan in the main games, there's a little more found in Fallout 76's concept art. Some early designs for communist power armor featured Chinese writing that said, "Taiwan must be liberated." That fits with the pre-war Fallout universe, where the People's Republic of China was aggressively expanding its influence, which is cool because I'm glad we got a little piece of info on this country. The one time Tanzania pops up is in Fallout 76, specifically in the Wild Appalachia update. Can you guess where? During the Pioneer Scout Tadpole badge exams. I bet you never saw that coming, and that's literally it. Turkey A is only brought up a few times across the Fallout series. In Far Harbor, there's a spot called the Aldersea Day Spa, and one of its big features was offering a traditional Turkish spa experience. There's also a couple of ancient references tied to the region. Pioneer Scout badge exam mentions Troy and Wilusa, both cities from ancient Turkey, as part of their quiz material. The flag even makes a quick appearance in that Vault Seller's Survival Guide episode. And I know, I hate to keep bringing up the scouts in the TV episode, but if that's what we got, then that's what we got.
Say there's a newcomer around here who doesn't understand that I'm a bartender, not a damn news bot.
While you never actually visit the United Kingdom in any of the games, it comes up a lot through character dialogue, robot catchphrases, and various bits of background world building. We don't get much detail about what life in the UK was like leading up to 2077, but there are a few clues. Mr. Handy robots sometimes blurt out lines like "for Queen and Country," which implies that the monarchy was probably still intact. Characters like Whitechapel Charlie and Johnny Weston also reference England, showing that it was still populated and active well into the 21st century. What happened to the UK after the bombs fell is unclear, but Fallout 3 does give us a little hint. Alistair Tenpenny, the man behind Tenpenny Tower, was born somewhere in the British Isles, and then he had made his way to the capital Wasteland sometime in the early 2200s. That suggests parts of the UK might have survived or were at least still inhabited long after the war. Mentions of the UK are scattered throughout the series. In Fallout 3, robots and museum displays reference Britain's involvement in the Revolutionary War. There's even a Protectron who rants about King George III. The Point Lookout DLC also has a cathedral named the Ark and Dove, which were real English settler ships. Fallout 4 introduces Whitechapel Charlie, who's a British-themed Mr. Handy who runs a bar. The Freedom Trail tour in Boston gives more nods to British troops from the 1770s. And there's more, so on and so forth, all just smaller and minor details. Fallout Tactics includes characters like Sharon, whose family is from Essex. And they also had Martin, who comes from a line that ran a UK-based software company. Emil Pagliarulo, who worked on Fallout 3, said characters like Tenpenny were included to remind players that other parts of the world still exist. Josh Sawyer also mentioned an early idea for a game set during the Resource Wars that would have involved British soldiers, but that concept never moved forward. In Far Harbor, you can find a placard in Vault 118 that talks about the Cardoza Medical Research Center, which was located in Venezuela. According to the plaque, Ezra Parker, one of the Vault's residents, was the one who funded and managed the project's construction. In Fallout 76, during the Pioneer Scouts Hunter Badge exam, Vietnam is referenced a couple times, and Vietnam also shows up in Fallout Tactics. The game's intro references the Vietnam War while describing the US military's history, though it leans more into real-world context than Fallout-specific lore. And that's it. So while Wyoming doesn't actually appear in any Fallout games yet, it does get a few shoutouts, mostly as potential escape plans for factions who didn't quite have the best of luck elsewhere. First up, we've got the Great Khans. Depending on how things go during the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, these guys might just pack up their chems and head north to Wyoming. Honestly, not a bad choice. Less NCR breathing down their necks and more open land for raiding, settling. Then we've got the Whitelegs, the violent wannabe Legion tribe from Honest Hearts. If Joshua Graham and the Dead Horses win their war, the surviving Whitelegs take off into the wilds of Wyoming. But, turns out, Wyoming's winters are no joke. Half of them freeze to death and the rest just scatter to the winds, never to be heard from again.
Unable to shake the memory of their brutal defeat and the Dead Horses' savagery in battle, the Whitelegs feared further reprisals. They fled north, out of Utah, into Wyoming. The wilderness was harsh, and the first winter claimed over half the tribe. When spring came, the survivors parted ways in small bands, and so the Whitelegs died a quiet, ignominious death.
I think we can agree that maybe a nuclear winter wasn't such a great idea. These are the only references we've had for Wyoming, unfortunately. I think Wyoming would be a cool place to see. Mutated bison, geysers, it could make for an interesting setting. Similar to something like West Virginia in '76.
Speaking on West Virginia, let's talk about Appalachia and Fallout 76. Like Mason said earlier, we don't want to get too long-winded on games that we have already experienced, so we'll just go over the highlights and things of that nature. Appalachia, depending on who you are and how you say it, is divided into 6 regions, each with its own unique identity and challenges. The forest, with its rolling green hills and small scattered settlements, serves as a starting point for many survivors. Further north, the Toxic Valley is a wasteland coated in chemical residue, a deadly reminder of the pre-war industry that once thrived there. Travel south and you'll find yourself in the Ash Heap, an industrial hellscape where coal mines still burn long after the bombs fell. The Savage Divide, a vast mountain range cutting through the map, hides remnants of the pre-war elite, while the Mire is a dense, fog-covered swamp filled with mutated horrors. Then there's Cranberry Bog, a region as beautiful as it is deadly, home to the remnants of the Enclave and the fearsome scorched beasts that dominate the skies. Though Vault 76 residents were meant to rebuild society, they emerged to find Appalachia already filled with stories of those who had tried, and those who have failed. The Responders, a faction made up of emergency service workers, had attempted to help survivors, setting up camps and training centers only to be wiped out by the horrifying Scorched Plague. The Brotherhood of Steel made its way into the region, establishing strongholds and fighting off the Scorched, but even they were unable to hold their ground. What remains of these factions is scattered throughout the world, pieces of history waiting to be uncovered. Beneath the surface of Appalachia lies a web of pre-war secrets, particularly when it comes to its government and military operations. West Virginia was home to several classified facilities, including the White Spring Bunker, which acted as a shadow government hub where even high-ranking officials could survive nuclear annihilation. This bunker, heavily automated and still operational long after the bombs fell, became a key location for the Enclave. Outside of the Enclave's influence, pre-war West Virginia was also home to projects like the Free States Movement, a group of survivalists who distrusted the government and took extreme measures to prepare for nuclear war. When the bombs did drop, they retreated into bunkers beneath the mire, only to meet a slow and tragic end when the Scorched invaded. Their fears of government overreach turned out to be well justified, but in the end, isolation wasn't enough to save them. Of course, no story about Appalachia would be complete without its cryptids, the legendary creatures of West Virginia folklore brought to life in terrifying ways. The Mothman, a winged glowing-eyed enigma, appears throughout the game, sometimes as a passive observer, sometimes as a hostile force. The Flatwoods Monster, inspired by real-life UFO encounters, roams the land in its eerie floating form. Then there's the Grafton Monster, a headless brute that seems to be a remnant of some twisted pre-war experiment. These creatures, alongside the mutated monstrosities left behind by the war, make Appalachia one of the most dangerous and mysterious settings in Fallout history. But what West Virginia is like now, and also outside of the Appalachia region, is anyone's guess. we have no info on it beyond 76, which took place nearly 200 years before the current timeline. A lot of stuff could change in that time as the radiation morphs the wasteland even further.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news for my friends in Washington, but we have hardly any information to go on. And honestly, I think Washington and Seattle would make a really interesting setting for a Fallout game. In Fallout 76 in the town of Charleston, we can find a piece of junk mail. This one right here. It's likely one of those marketing scams designed to make the person open the envelope. We can see that it came from Walla Walla, Washington, from a company called Rockwell Clearinghouse. This is currently the only piece of lore we have mentioning Washington, which seems crazy. In Fallout 3, Jack Smith claims that Virginia has been gone for over 200 years, yet the spirit of the Commonwealth of Virginia supposedly lives on in Andale, a small settlement in the capital wasteland. Meanwhile, in Fallout 4, we get glimpses of Virginia's past through places like Thicket Excavations, which once ordered materials from a company based in Petersburg, Virginia. Though Fallout 76 focuses on West Virginia, Virginia itself is referenced quite a bit throughout the Appalachia. The Robco Research Center in Cranberry Bog is confirmed to be located within Virginia, thanks to messages from its administrator Lisa Fields. There's also Camp Venture, which started as a military training ground for the endurance and survival training of the Virginians program. This suggests that the region was once a key location for military preparedness, something that likely played a role in the war effort before the world collapsed. Even characters in Fallout 76 have ties to Virginia. Lacey Drummond and this person that I can't pronounce their name both hail from the state, with Lacey claiming that Virginia had more hot zones than even the radioactive wilds of Appalachia, which seems wild considering how ridiculously mutated the Appalachian region is. Joe Cree comes from the Virginia coast, and Russell Dorsey recalls meeting someone while traveling along a Virginian road. One of Virginia's most iconic locations, the Shenandoah National Park, appears in Fallout 76 as part of the Skyline Valley region. The Virginia School District even had buses operating in the area, with one such bus still visible, crashed into a tree near the South River Bridge. So we get some brief but interesting information on Virginia, especially with the hot zone comment. On October 23, 2077, Salt Lake City became one of the many casualties of the Great War. Within 7 minutes, 13 nuclear warheads rained down on the city, engulfing it in fire and leaving nothing but craters, collapsed buildings, and charred skeletons of once great skyscrapers. When the smoke finally cleared, all that remained were the ruins of a few unlucky survivors stranded outside the cities when the bombs hit, one of whom was Randall Clark, the legendary survivalist whose story is deeply tied to honest hearts. Unfortunately, his wife and child weren't as lucky, perishing in the destruction. Like most devastated cities, Salt Lake was soon picked clean by scavengers. Any remaining resources from food to weapons were stripped away over time. Even pre-war law enforcement gear like the SWAT vest worn by Joshua Graham was recovered from the wreckage and repurposed by those who would later shape the region's fate. By the 2280s, the city was still a dangerous place, overrun by wasteland horrors, including giant mantises so numerous that they covered the ruins like blankets. By the way, the mantis information comes from the Fallout Bible, which is mostly considered non-canon, so take that with a grain of salt. If anyone wanted to reach the city safely, their best bet was traveling via Interstate 80 or passing through New Canaan, a post-war settlement that would later be destroyed by the Whitelegs under the orders from Caesar's Legion. Though Salt Lake City itself is uninhabitable, its influence lingers in the Mojave and beyond. The New Canaanites, a group of Mormon settlers who once lived near the ruins, were deeply connected to its history, though their settlement was ultimately wiped out in Caesar's war against them. Meanwhile, the Whitelegs scavenged heavily from Salt Lake's ruins, equipping themselves with old world weapons and armor to prove their worth to Caesar's Legion. Perhaps the most famous figure tied to Salt Lake City is Joshua Graham, the infamous Burned Man. He was once a high-ranking officer of Caesar's Legion, the original Malpais legate before being betrayed, set on fire, and thrown into the Grand Canyon. Graham survived, returned to New Canaan, and helped lead its people, at least until the Whitelegs came knocking. His armor, specifically his SLCPD marked SWAT vest, is a direct relic of Salt Lake's pre-war past, linking him to the city even after its destruction. Deep in the heart of Utah, Zion Canyon, formerly known as Zion National Park, stands as one of the most beautiful yet battle-worn locations in the Fallout universe. Unlike the heavily irradiated wastelands of the Mojave, or even the Capital Wasteland, Zion was spared from the direct nuclear bombardment. While Fallout initially poisoned the rivers and wildlife, nature quickly recovered, making Zion one of the few places where clean, radiation-free water still exists. But that doesn't mean Zion was safe. Over the years, the canyon became home to survivors, scavengers, and later warring tribes that would shape its future. The first known post-war inhabitant of Zion was Randall Clark, a former US soldier who fled here after Salt Lake City was destroyed. He lived in isolation, documenting his survival in journals while watching over newcomers from the shadows. One of these groups was a community of children who later grew into the Sorrows, a peaceful tribe who viewed Clark, whom they called the Father in the Caves, as a guardian. But Zion's peace wouldn't last. Over time, warring factions, including the brutal Whitelegs, emerged, leading to violent conflicts over the land. When the Whitelegs, acting under Caesar's orders, destroyed the new Canaanite settlement, the surviving missionaries and tribes sought refuge in Zion, sparking a new full-scale war for control of the canyon. By 2281, the conflict in Zion had reached a boiling point. The exiled Joshua Graham, formerly Caesar's right hand, sought vengeance against the Whitelegs, while his fellow missionary Daniel hoped to preserve the Sorrows' innocence by fleeing the canyon. Their opposing ideologies clashed when the courier arrived, drawn into the fight by the ill-fated Happy Trails Caravan Company. The courier's decisions would ultimately determine the fate of Zion, whether to wage war against the Whitelegs or abandon the canyon entirely. There's a lot more fine details on Utah, like the Canaanites, but I think we get the big picture on what Utah is like these days. I, for one, find it super intriguing, but clearly I'm biased.
This would be my personal choice for the next setting of a Fallout game. Before the bombs fell, Texas was part of the Texas Commonwealth, a political entity that also included Arkansas. This region was known for its fierce independence and rich resources. During the Great War in 2077, Texas, like much of the world, was subjected to nuclear bombardment. However, due to its vast size, some areas remained relatively unscathed, at least initially, offering refuge to survivors. Before the Great War, Texas was still proud of its independent roots. A museum kiosk in the wasteland even reminds visitors that Texas was once its own republic before being annexed by the US in the 19th century. That Texas pride ran deep, influencing everything from firearms manufacturing, like Red Eagle firearms in Austin, to pop culture. Even in the world of baseball, Texas had a presence. On the eve of nuclear annihilation, a Texan team was battling the Boston swatting Sultans in what would turn out to be the last ever baseball championship. Despite its massive size, Texas's fate after the bombs remains largely unknown. John Cassidy, the old drifter from Fallout 2, wonders if Texas managed to survive the war, but there's no clear answer. Some people like Tex Rogers tried to return home after the world ended, though whether they made it back is anyone's guess. Meanwhile, the death car in the Vicky and Vance casino still carries the bullet holes from a famous pre-war shootout in Plano, Texas. Texas's law enforcement legacy also stretches into the wasteland, with Fallout New Vegas mentioning that the Desert Rangers, one of the oldest known groups of wasteland lawmen, can trace their roots all the way back to the famous Texas Rangers. It sucks that we don't have a lot of info on Texas, but it's also a good thing. It's a really big blank slate for Bethesda or whoever to make a cool Fallout game. While parts of Fallout 76's Appalachia region in West Virginia come somewhat close, there's no canon storyline crossing into Tennessee. If you're a player who does a ton of digging into holotapes and notes, you would have found that the Ladies Auxiliary Tape 8 in Boston mentioned that there are new mugs at a corner store made from Tennessee.
Gemma, what was in the news here last week?
Noella's made a cheesecake as big as a table.
No, not that. I mean, didn't somebody get mugged or something up the way?
Oh, yeah, right. Ernest did just get a whole lot of new mugs up at the corner store. Nice. Made in Tennessee, I think.
For Christ's sake, Gemma.
While an observations note from the Night of the Moth notes discusses traversing a mountain trail in Tennessee where, quote, "The wind carries a fine gray powder, which clings to my face and hair." Is this ash? Likely so, possibly suggesting a fire or facility causing damage to the air in the nearby region. Not much else can be said about Tennessee. There's only one man in all of the Fallout universe with the stones to mention South Dakota, Robert McCready, who jokingly says, "Some strange things turn up in these places. Ever hear about that warehouse in South Dakota? Yeesh." It's hard to say what secrets South Dakota hosts aside from a shady warehouse. When there's almost no info on a specific state that we're attempting to cover, then desperate times call for desperate measures. Can you name the Fallout item that is manufactured in South Carolina? The Lonesome Road is your only clue. I'll wait. It's the MRE. If you zoom in on this pixelated item, you will find that the MREs found in New Vegas' expansion hail from Mullen, South Carolina. Yep, that's it. We got nothing else to say about this place. Pennsylvania, thanks to the Pit DLC for Fallout 3, which is set in the ruins of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, has a prominent place in Fallout lore. More recently, Fallout 76 introduced Expeditions, the Pit, allowing players to return to that same location. In Fallout 3, we learn of the oppressive conditions of local workers, many of whom are enslaved and forced to labor in the crumbling steel mills. A mysterious disease, often called troglodyte degeneration contagion, or TDC, afflicts many inhabitants, mutating them into trogs. While Pittsburgh was damaged by the Great War, it clearly avoided the total nuclear devastation seen in places like Washington, D.C. or LA. Its steel industry becomes a rare resource for forging weapons and goods in the wasteland, which is why raiders, slavers, and opportunists fight to control it in 2277. In 76, we enter the timeline of 2102 to 2103. Though the Pit is the same city from Fallout 3, the factions, visuals, and story elements differ somewhat given the earlier in-universe date, and we get a taste at how the early post-war history and its raider and labor dynamics first took shape. I mentioned the 76 piece since many players forgoed 76 and ignored it entirely. What we do know is that Pennsylvania was the location of a confirmed nuclear strike the day of the Great War. Why? This could be because a military operations center known as Raven Rock was located in the mountains of Pennsylvania at one point, perhaps a stronghold during the war. During 76, we find that those who settled at Foundation traveled to Appalachia from a variety of areas, including Pennsylvania, such as Aubrey Williams the Doctor. In the early post-war days, Pennsylvania may have been more pleasant than depictions by 2277, as several characters in the franchise wandered through the state unscathed. But with 150 years of time passing, the future is fairly bleak.
Anchorage was the center of a big battle, and because of this, it needed to pull resources from other states, such as the command forward depot that held munitions, supplies, and armor, that was then manufactured here and then shipped off to Anchorage for battle. It was ran by U.S. Army Quartermaster General Victor Breckinridge and based out of Oregon.
To General Constantine Chase, Anchorage Command, encoded message 457980A. Decryption applied. These crates contain only a portion of the items you requested on 09/17/77. Due to the increase in demand, we were unable to fill the entire order. Please distribute this equipment based on greatest need, and we'll attempt to send the rest of your request as soon as possible. Enclosed, you'll also find our new improved LAS 009 General's Overcoat. Hope it will serve as an appropriate upgrade. General Victor Breckinridge, U.S. Army Quartermaster, Command Forward Depot, Oregon.
So we know Oregon had a militaristic contribution to the war. We also know that Dr. Morrison Rand was a professor of anthropological archaeology at a college in Oregon and then was abducted by aliens.
I'll do what you want. This is Dr. Morrison Rand, professor of anthropological archaeology at Banfield College, Humboldt, Oregon.
Finally, Coos Bay, a coastal town that suffered from flooding post-war, was home to a chemist making jet. They abandoned the town, describing the situation as a shit show. If an apocalyptic Walter White is leaving their customer base because it's too chaotic, then we can likely assume that Oregon isn't doing too well these days. If you've ever read this letter from Vault-Tec in Fallout 3, it specifically mentions Oklahoma in a line reading, "For a full list of Vault-Tec facilities and available accommodations in exciting locales such as Oklahoma and newly annexed Canada, contact your local Vault-Tec representative." Do I think there's vaults in Oklahoma? Well, now I do, of course I do. But do I also think the letter was a funny way of making Oklahoma sound more impressive than it might really be? Just like Vault-Tec does with all of its vaults? Yes I do. The state of Ohio itself remains uncharted in the official narrative, with no dedicated storyline. But that doesn't mean it isn't mentioned here and there throughout the game. If you've explored Point Pleasant in Fallout 76, the North Road Bridge is an unmarked location in Fallout 76. This pre-war traffic bridge once allowed passage over the Ohio River, and was built at the site of the historic Silver Bridge after its collapse in 1967, which was serving as a link between Gallipolis, Ohio, and Point Pleasant, West Virginia prior to the collapse. And sorry if I mispronounced the name in Ohio. We also get bits that raiders in Ohio had once traded with raiders from the Craterway Party, and that the recruit in the Brotherhood 1st Expeditionary Force named Initiate Norland is from Ohio too. If we want to get deeper into more Ohio-based objects from the game, the L.S. Smuckman Company, a pre-war foods organization, manufactured industrial-sized shortening that can be found throughout homes in Appalachia. There's also a connection to the infamous Mothman cryptid and its followers in Ohio, so there could be creepy lore ties here too. But this is really just a small theory at this point. Lee Rapid Pharmaceuticals was an American pre-war company that specialized in manufacturing quick-working medical supplies, similar to dispensers healing users in ways seen via Stimpaks. As with many other states, recruitment for the Great War did not turn a blind eye to this state. Given that Appalachia is so close to North Carolina, it's actually surprising we don't have more details on this state. New York, especially New York City, is presumed to have been heavily bombed and utterly devastated during the Great War. But no official game or DLC has ever taken place there. It's occasionally mentioned or alluded to in passing as one of the many major cities destroyed on October 23rd, but no canonical work has been elaborated on its post-apocalyptic state. Effectively, Fallout lore treats New York as a ruin so severely hit that very little is known about its current fate. There's a guy named Giuseppe living out in the Appalachia that has a connection to the Big Apple. If 4 of Giuseppe's riddles are correctly answered, he will confess his true reason for being in Appalachia to the Vault Dweller. His mother died in New York. He's come to Appalachia to seek out any surviving relatives from his time in Clarksburg. A former professional baseball player named Nathan Broadhurst heard that New York was worse off than where they had come from, and that the state was the location of a confirmed nuclear strike the day of the Great War. Although the Eastern Seaboard has already been done a handful of times from the Fallout team, who wouldn't want to see a ruined New York City make an appearance in the games or maybe the Fallout TV show in the future?
Most knowledge of New Mexico is brought in from rumors and truths with its connection to Caesar's Legion. Caesar himself mentions that the Legion has expanded into several states, including all of New Mexico. And although he's an asshole, I don't think he's lying about this conquest. A Legion slave further corroborates this statement when she tells you that she was originally from a small town in New Mexico before the Legion burned it and enslaved her. Finally, our man Dale Barton explains that trading with the NCR is way too expensive, so he usually sticks with doing business in Arizona and New Mexico. What we know is that New Mexico has been invaded by the Legion and that trade is relatively easy in New Mexico, assuming the Legion doesn't view you as a threat. Check out this creature we found from the wasteland in New Jersey. Allegedly, New Jersey isn't the spot you want to be in during the apocalypse. The Blue Ridge Caravan Company bartender Herschel Klein uses Hoboken, New Jersey as a punchline to one of his jokes.
Here's one I heard. We're all just living in a simulation. That's right, none of this is real. Die here, and you'll just wake up in a memory lounger somewhere in Hoboken, New Jersey. To be honest, I'm not sure which reality is worse. Ha ha ha! Thank you. I'm here all week.
I'm done with the New Jersey jokes, I promise. For those of you who ventured into 76 and continued into Atlantic City, you already know what New Jersey is like in Fallout. Before the Great War, Atlantic City was famous for its sprawling boardwalk and vibrant casino quarter, sandwiched between the Pine Barrens and the Atlantic Ocean. Carly Day, its last pre-war mayor, had set up the city government to run itself while she enjoyed an easy retirement. When the bombs fell, Atlantic City avoided direct nuclear hits but faced catastrophic flooding, destroying much of the city center, though the inland casino quarter was spared. Mayor Day, unfortunately, was ill-prepared for the crisis, dismissing nuclear threats as mere political drama. She struggled to manage rationing and relief efforts, eventually relying on the mob's assistance to secure food as shortages worsened. By 2078, the city descended into starvation and pure chaos, with Mayor Day detached from the reality of her suffering citizens. Things, however, only worsened until Timothy Lane, a local farmer, intervened after a mob attack on his farm. Witnessing the dire conditions firsthand, Lane took control of the city from Mayor Day, reorganizing the government alongside his wife Frida, who introduced methods to purify soil and grow food again. Under their leadership, the Munis restored order, providing essential services like power, clean water, healthcare, and security. To maintain stability, Lane formed a practical alliance with the mafia-led Lombardi family and the entertainment-focused showmen. This triad balanced power by assigning clear roles. The Munis handled governance, the family managed gambling and vice, and the showmen provided entertainment. Despite tensions and occasional disagreements, Atlantic City prospered, becoming one of the East Coast's most thriving communities. Recently, however, the city has faced new challenges. The Overgrown, previously ignored as a minor threat, have emerged unexpectedly, straining the city's defenses. Additionally, growing tensions between the factions threaten the stability carefully built by Lane's pragmatic diplomacy, casting uncertainty on the city's future.
While Fallout 4 is set in the nearby Massachusetts, and the Far Harbor DLC takes the player to the coastal Maine, New Hampshire has never been a major location, had a dedicated quest, or received notable lore mentions in the franchise. Unless you recall this symbol. If you don't, I wouldn't feel too down about it. This is the New Hampshire and Massachusetts pre-war freight railroad and transportation company logo that was operated in the Commonwealth. Many of their boxcars can be found loaded with a variety of goods, including power armor and ammunition. NH&M had rail connections to the Boston Police rationing site, the Oberlin Station, and Bedford Station. These can also be found in Appalachia. Time to mention people's favorite. Nevada is most famously featured as the primary setting of Fallout New Vegas. The area around post-Great War Las Vegas, aka New Vegas, is known as the Mojave Wasteland, where multiple factions including the New California Republic and Caesar's Legion vie for control over Hoover Dam and its resources. Parts of Nevada also appear in Fallout 2 with New Reno, a mobster-run city, but New Vegas is where Nevada truly takes center stage in Fallout lore. Unlike places such as the Boneyard or the Capital Wasteland, Las Vegas was spared most of the direct nuclear hits during the Great War of 2077. Mr. House's intercept systems took out or diverted the majority of incoming warheads. As a result, large portions of the city's infrastructure remained standing. Despite fewer detonations, the Mojave was still rocked by the war's fallout and the collapse of national infrastructure, leading to a multitude of factions fighting for power in this area. Hoover Dam's continued functionality and the region's relatively intact roads made Nevada a hotly contested region in the post-war area between these factions. As most know, Las Vegas is renamed to New Vegas, protected by Securitrons and a walled strip. New Vegas remains a gambling and entertainment hub. Control of the strip's casino is divided among charismatic and often seedy families, the Tops, Gomorrah, and the Ultralux. But these families aren't the only factions here. The NCR is expanding eastward from California and sets up bases throughout the Mojave, seeking to secure Hoover Dam and the region's resources. Meanwhile, Caesar's Legion, a slaver empire formed east of the Colorado River, marches on Nevada to claim the dam, seeing it as a strategic and symbolic stronghold. Outside of the Hoover Dam and the Strip, Fallout 2 gives us a taste of New Reno, a lawless city controlled by various crime families, including the Mordinos, Bishops, Wrights, and the Salvatores. It's known for its casinos, drug trade, boxing rings, and general debauchery, often called the biggest little city in the wasteland. The city's events foreshadow the mob elements seen later in Fallout New Vegas, though on a smaller scale and with fewer direct ties to the Mojave storyline. The Mojave Wasteland, New Vegas Strip, Hoover Dam, and factions like the NCR and Caesar's Legion make it one of the most pivotal battlegrounds in the post-apocalyptic West. Most of us have seen Nebraska in Fallout and never even realized it. Do you remember Vault 33? The telescopic projector loops images of Nebraskan countryside to the ignorant 33ers. Not to make Nebraskans feel too bad, but I'd be okay if the devs or producers focused on other state expansions first. We definitely need a Fallout game with the setting in the high Rockies. We've had the Commonwealth, California, Vegas, DC, but what we haven't had is a remote high mountainous area filled with snow and mutated creatures, similar to what Jacobstown could be, but a whole game. Speaking of New Vegas though, our knowledge about this state all stems from that game. If you played New Vegas and you had the Lady Killer perk, you may have found a dialogue option when talking to the Drifter that mentions having visited Montana. The Lonesome Drifter in New Vegas also mentions being from the direction of Montana, where he lived with his mother after his father abandoned them, until she passed away from hardship. He definitely looks like he's from the Great North. By the way, if you have any other references to this state or any other state, let us know in the comments. From what we can tell, it's relatively unheard of in the Wasteland.
Missouri is one of those states mentioned in the canon but non-canon game Fallout Tactics. Prior to the Great War, Kansas City was a large nuclear launch site. Although the city was hit by the bombs during the war, the staff in charge of the silo somehow survived, but it doesn't mean they weren't affected. The staff morphed into ghouls and formed a town in the center of the ruined city called Gravestone. Before 2197, the ghouls of Gravestone lived in peace, forming both a community and a religious cult centered around the last intact nuclear bomb in their silo, which they revered as Plutonius. Their leader, T-, served as both bishop and head of civil affairs. However, in 2198, Gamoran's army set up a base in Kansas City and attempted to seize Gravestone, aiming to claim the Ghouls' sacred atomic bomb. The Ghouls took refuge in their cathedral, where Plutonius was kept. A few weeks later, Defcon, the acting leader, and Bishop reached out to the Midwestern Brotherhood of Steel, pleading for their protection against the super mutants. The Midwestern Brotherhood answered the call, equipping the Ghouls and Cathedral acolytes with weapons and successfully fending off the mutant attack. The defense was led by the Warrior, who not only safeguarded Gravestone, but also launched a counterstrike on the super mutant base in Kansas City. This assault resulted in the deaths of 3 mutant commanders and secured the region. In return for their aid, the Brotherhood demanded Plutonius, later using it to breach the vault door of Vault Zero. Did you know Mississippi is the nation's largest weapons depot in the US? Fine, I'm not sure if it is. But what I do know is that a General Brock from Fort Strong, who was a commanding officer, sent launchers to a supply yard in Mississippi. Was Mississippi a hotbed for the invasion? Probably not. Was it likely a supply or distribution center for weaponry in the pre-war era? Likely so. Maybe one day we'll get to explore Mississippi's mysteries. As far as I know, there's only one reference to Minnesota. The fictional character Minnesota Fats, whose nickname is derived from the state's name, is mentioned as part of an advertisement for pool sets in Vault 21's gift shop. A terminal entry in the Vault advertising pool sets in the gift store has the tagline, "Hustle it like Minnesota Fats." This refers to Minnesota Fats, a fictional pool hustler created by author Walter Tevis. At least I think that's how you say his last name.
Fallout 4, in my opinion, appears to be one of the best Fallout games we've ever had. And although Fallout 4 refers to the state as the Commonwealth, it was technically called the Commonwealth of Massachusetts before the Great War. But like most locations, the Great War left its imprint on this state when it was finished with it. Massachusetts is arguably one of the most important states in Fallout lore because it's the setting of Fallout 4 in the Commonwealth. Boston and its surrounding regions are central to the game's main story, featuring major factions like the Institute, the Minutemen, the Brotherhood of Steel, and the Railroad. While there are no specific canon details highlighting Massachusetts as a special target of the Great War itself, beyond just being a major city center that was obviously struck, its post-war identity, especially the rise of the Institute, makes it crucial to understanding Fallout 4 and the broader East Coast storyline. So yes, we do know that it was bombed in the Great War of 2077, because although Boston's partial remains and neighborhoods are navigable, they are heavily mutated and scarred by radiation. However, Fallout lore doesn't describe a unique reason the region was singled out beyond it being a significant urban center and technological hub. Evidence of the blast's impact is mostly dramatically shown in the glowing sea, a highly irradiated region southwest of Boston, said to be near ground zero of one of the bombs. Unlike Washington, D.C., the capital wasteland, which was targeted for political reasons, or even Los Angeles, the boneyard for its military industry, Massachusetts' major significance in Fallout stems from its post-war role as the seat of advanced research and faction conflicts. The Institute, arguably the most advanced group in not only the Commonwealth but maybe all of the Wasteland, operate beneath the ruins of the old Commonwealth Institute of Technology, a post-war analog of MIT. They've pioneered incredible technologies, including the creation of synthetic humans, which is a pretty significant contribution to Fallout lore. Meanwhile, the Minutemen, who are a local militia dedicated to protecting the settlements in the Commonwealth, received their name and iconography from historical Massachusetts and the American Revolution. We also have the Railroad, a clandestine organization focused on freeing and protecting runaway synths from the Institute. Their headquarters and quest lines are deeply intertwined with Boston's historical sites. Finally, the Brotherhood of Steel. A major Brotherhood airship expedition arrives in the Commonwealth, viewing the Institute's technology as too dangerous to leave uncontrolled. Little things like the Nuka World theme park built in Massachusetts also add to the richness of the series' history. So while its catastrophic bombing is never singled out in official lore as a unique or special strategic strike, Boston's post-apocalyptic remnants and the Institute's secretive tech make it one of the franchise's most significant locations for exploring the aftershocks of the Great War. Maryland's main ties to Fallout lore come through Fallout 3 and its Point Lookout DLC, both of which partially or entirely take place in Maryland. The DC wasteland itself spills across the old District of Columbia boundaries into parts of Virginia and Maryland. Although Washington, D.C. was a prime target in the Great War of 2077, there is no canon spotlight on Maryland's own nuclear strikes, their special military importance, or unique role in the war itself. Nonetheless, Maryland does feature prominently in Fallout 3's setting, and especially in the swampy backwoods intrigue of Point Lookout. Point Lookout avoided direct nuclear strikes during the Great War, but its waters and swamps became heavily contaminated from the irradiated Potomac River flowing from the Capitol Wasteland. Over 2 centuries, dense swamps overtook the abandoned buildings, leaving nature to reclaim much of the region. The radiation drastically altered local life, resulting in mutated creatures like the swamp folk, who are violent, highly deformed, inbred locals, as well as feral ghouls and swamp lurks drawn to the radioactive waters. Despite the lack of structured civilization, visitors can still encounter and trade with isolated individuals like Tobar the Ferryman, Haley at Haley's Hardware, Hanada, Marguerite, and local tribal groups. Point Lookout has gained attention due to its rare punga fruit, unique to the area's bogs, and persistent legends about hidden treasures and pre-war technology waiting to be discovered. The marshes surrounding Point Lookout also contain pockets of biogas, primarily methane produced from decomposing bodies in Civil War era mass graves. The radiation altered the decomposition process, creating areas of greenish-gray, smoking, steaming muck that occasionally release flammable gas bubbles, adding yet another layer of danger and mystery to the eerie swamps.
2 words: Far Harbor. This expansion to Fallout 4 is of course our lovely bit of lore of Maine in the Fallout universe. The island of Far Harbor is a primary setting of the expansion, and its significance is very Easter eggy. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, the player travels to Mount Desert Island, which in-universe is referred to simply as the Island. The largest settlement there is Far Harbor, a coastal town protected from lingering radiation fog by rudimentary defenses. The storyline involves 3 factions: Far Harbor locals, the Children of Adam, and a synth refuge known as Acadia, all in conflict over land and ideology. The Vim Pop Factory is situated on the island, and it may not have significance to war, but it's cool to see a competitor of Nuka-Cola here. The R&D employees were told to put the taste of Maine into a bottle. I'd imagine it tasted like sea salt and the sweat of Stephen King, cause you know, Stephen King's books are primarily based in Maine. Which reminds me, there's a pet cemetery on this island too, a nod to Stephen himself. Even the elaboration of the Children of Adam, which is a cult on the island, has subtle similarities with Stephen King's Mist, since the Children of Adam have this connection with fog, similar to the Mist book of Stephen King's lore. I could go on about the Easter eggs that Maine has in Fallout lore, but I'll stop the egg hunting here. Because of Fallout's alternate history, many states were hit during the Great War. Maine was presumably impacted, but there is no detailed canon account of nuclear strikes or major battles there, at least that we know of. Even known major military installations in the real-world Maine, like naval shipyards, do not factor heavily into any mainstream Fallout releases or official lore expansions. With the amount of cryptid lore that the Fallout franchise has introduced into Fallout 76, it would be cool to see a Louisiana expansion, since there could be cool culty shit or cryptid lore expanded on here. I know that may be a hot take, since even 76 fans are divided in how heavy 76 has leaned into weird lore, but I personally find it interesting. You'll find that many characters added in the Expeditions expansion of 76 have tiny tidbits of info from other states. Ellison is one of those characters. We know he was born in Louisiana before moving to West Virginia with his family. He was young when he moved, so there isn't a ton to expand on aside from this.
Who, me? Oh, I'm not that interesting. Came here from Kentucky, wanted to see more of the world. I had a pretty happy childhood. We had a whole commune. All the kids raised together, so I had like 24 siblings and lots of parents. Got here, heard about the responders, and thought, that's for me. It's like my mom's always said, when everybody pitches in, there's nothing we can't do together.
This is some of the most credible evidence that Kentucky is also habitable, since this gal named Sophie clearly came from here. But what else do we know? Carver Timmerman from 76 mentions living in the state of what used to be Kentucky. John Henry Eden, that advanced AI antagonist from Fallout 3, claims to have grown up from Kentucky, but really this is because he borrowed this from the life of Abraham Lincoln. Perhaps the most important piece of info, in our opinion, is that the Independent Arms Group, which was a pre-war company, was a weapons manufacturer headquartered in Liberty, Kentucky. Oh wait, you don't know who this group is? The IAG name appears on the suppressor for the assault rifle in Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, so their weapons are used in the Wasteland to this day. Like the characters who reference this place, Kansas is really only a mentioned-only place. Whether the nuclear fallout created a devastating Dust Bowl 2.0, or how it impacted the Midwest, really is anyone's guess. If you're deep in Fallout 76 lore, there's a place called the Pit, which is the remains of Pittsburgh. Anyway, a bloke named Ken, who was mentioned in the Expeditions update of 76, once talked about migrating to a city in Kansas. There's also a random character named Elliot who has a partner in Kansas, and this too is mentioned only in 76. So yeah, it's a stretch, but what I feel comfortable saying is that Kansas isn't completely uninhabitable since there are mentioned characters living there today. Well, in the future.
How often do you find yourself perusing the laboratory notes in Fallout 76? If you search really hard, you'll find a note from Dr. Constant Nichols saying, "It's Thanksgiving Day, and instead of spending time in Iowa with my folks, I've decided to stick it out at the facility to finish up the first round of my project." The doc's current project focuses on data sonification filtering, removing unnecessary background noise that the NERA array picks up from various stellar phenomena, such as plasma waves, planetary radio emissions, and particles striking our planet's magnetosphere. It's actually quite noisy up there in space. My particular job is to classify each individual sound and then create a filter so it can be removed from the array's desired frequency range. I'm almost done with my first quadrant, then I'll head home. And that's it. That's the only mention of Iowa in Fallout currently. Just this doctor who decided not to visit family in Iowa with her folks, and that was pre-war. For now, I guess Iowa will remain a mystery. For a state with as big of a city as Chicago, which has a thick history in US culture, it's a surprise we don't have more information on post-war Illinois or Chicago specifically. For now, we'll have to rely on a young boy named Tommy who once lived in Chicago. One day, Tiny Tommy came across Eddie, an iBot, and he persuaded his dad to take him in. He was excited to have a robot just like Ralphie the robot. He brought Eddie back to his mother's garage where he helped repair Eddie using a pre-war Illinois license plate. Tommy's story is heard through Eddie's audio logs in the Divide, but one thing that isn't provided in the audio logs is more info on post-war Chicago. The only other canon reference we have to Illinois is historical facts from Hannibal Hamlin in Fallout 3. And yes, I said canon for a reason because Illinois, particularly Chicago, appears in Fallout Tactics as the starting point for the Midwestern Brotherhood of Steel. However, Fallout Tactics has partial canon status, meaning certain broad ideas, like the existence of a Brotherhood splinter group in the Midwest, are considered valid, but many specific plot points are either considered non-canon or unconfirmed in modern Fallout continuity. Chicago would have been a likely target during the nuclear exchange in October 23rd, but there's no mainline Fallout game or developer commentary detailing the strikes or aftermath in Illinois the way Washington or Boston are detailed. So while it's safe to assume Illinois was significantly impacted, we don't have a thorough Bethesda-confirmed narrative on what exactly happened there. We all know that the Legion controls major portions of the Southwest, and depending on how you ended New Vegas' campaign, there will be a brief mention of the Spudley State. If the Great Khans are still allied with the Legion when the NCR wins, the remnants of the tribe are driven north into the wilderness of Idaho, following the Second Battle of Hoover Dam. This logistically makes sense because the Legion clearly has status in other parts of the world, such as Colorado, which we'll get to shortly. So they've clearly expanded more north than the Hoover Dam border. Very few states on this list get me as excited to think what if on other than Hawaii. Hawaii is such a random location to consider when we think of a post-apocalyptic location. In fact, I can't even think of another show or game that has really exploited a location like Hawaii after a nuclear fallout. Unless you consider Dead Island, which is zombies, but even still, I think Hawaii would be an interesting place to consider. The Pacific would likely be irradiated, but I would be curious if Hawaii is relatively pristine, with the main issue being communicating with the mainland. Aside from historical records in-game of what Hawaii was pre-war, the only mention of this location we have comes from Fallout 4's Far Harbor add-on, where a mentioned-only character named Thomas Davis, who's the champion of the Bar Harbor Bowling League in 2075, knew he was departing to Hawaii and promised his friends that he would send some pineapples if they promised not to try to bowl with the fruits. He kept in touch with them, sending them postcards until he suddenly stopped in April. But like I said, that's all pre-war anyways. Maybe something catastrophic did happen in the Pacific. Or maybe chaos to the country's infrastructure cut off the islands from the rest of the world.
If you're from the West Coast, did you know that the Appalachian Mountains extend into Georgia? Better yet, did you know that Fallout 76 takes place in the Appalachia? You probably did, but it's worth mentioning since many of us never played Fallout 76 due to its rocky launch. We mention this because although 76 has a diverse range of locations, the Appalachia is primarily radiated, lush and green, vast and likely humid. If you talk to Miss Brown, the leader of the villages in 76 at the retreat, she talks about how Appalachia's humidity is similar to what she felt back in Georgia. In Fallout 4, a character to have familiarity with the state is Matt Murtaugh, or Matt the Missile Murtaugh, who was a star pitcher of Boston's Swatting Sultans in 2077. And he's also a mentioned-only character that grew up in Atlanta. The only other mention that comes to mind is a foreman in Fallout 4, who briefly states he got his military background out in that part of the country. Aside from that, I don't know if we will ever see a ton of background on post-war Georgia, unless it comes in the form of some type of future expansion with 76. A Fallout game in Florida seems like a long shot, but we would love to see it. The white sanded beaches, swamps, and perhaps a few abandoned theme parks in the post-war setting would be awesome to see. If you recall bumping into the powerful merchant company operating on the East Coast known as the Blue Ridge Caravan Company in 76, bartender Herschel Klein says the Brotherhood 1st Expeditionary Force, which is a branch of the Brotherhood of Steel, and the organization at large, is really just a traveling theater troupe pretending to be soldiers. And one of his regulars claims to have seen Paladin Romani performing a trapeze act in Florida as proof. Obviously a joke, but also the only mention of the state. Florida has been relatively hush-hush throughout the games and TV series thus far. When envisioning Connecticut's role in Fallout, I like to think of The Last of Us, the type of post-apocalyptic setting, since most of what we know of this location in the post-war feels like transients are the main group residing here. There's primarily 3 characters associated to this place. First, Lance Ames, who is literally a mentioned-only character in Fallout 4, who reported being in the state when the bombs went off. And he clearly left the state. It's not a lot to go off of, but clearly Connecticut didn't offer a lot since he left. We then have Gilbert Hobson, who traveled to Appalachia from his hometown Monroe, Connecticut. This is transient number 2, of course. While traveling from Boston to Charleston in Appalachia in the immediate aftermath of the Great War, Jim Walker and Nathan Broadhurst followed highways 90 and 84 until reaching a friendly group of travelers in Hartford, Connecticut. After joining together, the group continued on and would later split up in Pennsylvania. Of course, this is transient number 3. Overall, what we know is everyone that was here ended up elsewhere. The Fallout lore in Colorado is rather sparse, but we do have some cool characters that are acquainted with the state as well as the faction that controls the state. As we will mention shortly, in Fallout New Vegas, Caesar's Legion has a strong hold in the Southwest, and if you ever take the time to talk to Caesar himself, you'll find that one of the states he's expanded into includes much of Colorado. If you downloaded the New Vegas add-on of Lonesome Road and got acquainted with Ulysses, a former badass legionnaire, he will describe how Legate Lanius put Colorado to the sword. Aside from the fragmented bits of info we gain from the Legion, the Cyberdog formerly known as Rex, who is a possible companion, served with the police in Colorado.
California is the cornerstone of classic Fallout lore. The first 2 Fallout games take place almost entirely in the post-Great War wastes of Southern and Northern California. It's where the Vault Dweller from Fallout 1 and the Chosen One from Fallout 2 undertake their quests, and it's the birthplace of many iconic Fallout elements. The New California Republic, the original Brotherhood of Steel, and the Master's Army of Super Mutants. Los Angeles, or the Boneyard in particular, was a primary nuclear target during the Great War, leaving much of Southern California in ruins. We could probably talk about this state for the next 2 hours if we wanted, because the lore and narrative are deeply interwoven here. So I'll try to bring up the bigger points and highlights, but also make it reasonable so that we don't take up too much time with it. After the Great War devastated America's West Coast with nuclear attacks, major areas like San Diego and Los Angeles were left in ruins, with enormous craters marking the landscape, especially around what used to be Orange County. The scale of destruction made sense considering key military and research installations like the West Tech Research Facility, Mariposa Military Base, and Sierra Army Depot, which were all located in the region. Although casualties were immense, some survivors found refuge in underground vaults. Notable examples include Vault 13, which was well stocked due to its late completion, and Vaults 15 and 8. Those left above ground formed their own communities. Captain Roger Maxson, for instance, led a group of renegade soldiers at Mariposa to establish the Brotherhood of Steel. Even smaller towns like Junktown, started by a former soldier, began to sprout up. By 2080, radiation had triggered mutations, dramatically altering wildlife and humans. The chaos eventually settled enough for survivors to form new societies. In 2083, the irradiated survivors from Vault 12 found a necropolis beneath Bakersfield. Soon after, other vaults opened, leading to the establishment of significant settlements like Vault City in 2091 and Adietum in the Los Angeles Boneyard in 2092. In 2093, Angus founded the Hub around a small desert oasis. It quickly became a vital trading center, introducing bottle caps as currency, soon becoming the standard across the wasteland. Harold, a notable caravan trader from Vault 29, became prominent in the Hub by 2096. Vault 15 then opened in 2097, but overcrowding pushed many of the dwellers into the wasteland, forming raider groups known as the Khans, the Vipers, and the Jackals. The remaining settlers established Shady Sands in 2098, using their Vault Gex for a fresh start. This small town eventually laid the groundwork for the powerful New California Republic, changing the future of the wasteland entirely. For a short while, the wasteland saw relatively calm, interrupted only occasionally by mutant attacks on trading caravans. By 2102, however, these attacks grew increasingly frequent, causing severe disruptions in trade. To address this, Harold teamed up with Richard Gray, an exile from Vault City, forming one of the wasteland's first adventuring groups to find the source of these mutant threats. On May 22nd, they set out from the Hub with several others, discovering the Mariposa military base about a month later. The base had deteriorated after being abandoned by the Brotherhood of Steel, leaving its dangerous forced evolutionary virus vats exposed. This had allowed a new breed of mutants to emerge and threaten the region. During a confrontation, Gray accidentally fell into the vats and Harold was knocked unconscious. He was then later rescued by traders and brought back to the Hub. Harold's incomplete exposure to FEV left him mutated into a ghoul-like figure. Upon returning home, his former associates abandoned him, turning him from a successful caravan leader into a wandering outcast. Meanwhile, Gray endured extreme mutations from his overdose of FEV. After weeks of suffering, his condition finally stabilized, and by November, he began experimenting with the virus on animals and eventually humans. Gray adopted a new identity, the Master, and he developed the concept of the Unity, a plan for a superior race of super mutants. With an army formed from those his mutants had captured, the Master's influence quickly began to spread across the wasteland. Throughout the 2150s, many wasteland inhabitants were still unaware of the growing threat posed by the Master and his mutant army. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood of Steel rose as a dominant force after defeating the Viper Raiders in 2155. Under John Maxon's leadership, the Brotherhood established trade with the Hub, despite occasional tensions, especially after the water merchants attempted to steal their weapons. By the early 2160s, the Brotherhood discovered the existence of the super mutants, prompting heightened security measures. In December 2161, a Vault Dweller left Vault 13 searching for a replacement water chip, but soon stumbled upon the Master's plans. Allied with the Brotherhood, the Vault Dweller defeated the Master beneath the cathedral and destroyed the Mariposa military base, effectively ending the Unity. Despite these heroic efforts, the Vault Dweller was exiled by the Overseer, leading to a small group leaving the Vault to join him. Together, they founded Arroyo in 2165. Marcus, a former Unity soldier, and Jacob, a Brotherhood knight, formed an unusual partnership in 2185, leading to the creation of Broken Hills, which was a peaceful community of mutants and humans. Meanwhile, the Vault Dwellers' heroics had allowed settlements like Shady Sands to flourish, eventually leading to the establishment of the NCR. The NCR quickly grew into a regional powerhouse, significantly expanding under Tandy's presidency, becoming the Wasteland's major political and economic force by 2241. Conflicts emerged notably around Redding and its valuable gold supply, creating rivalries between the NCR, Vault City, and New Reno. Simultaneously, a shadowy group known as the Enclave sought to eradicate humanity using a deadly variant of the FEV. Their plans were thwarted by the Chosen One, the Vault Dweller's descendant who saved kidnapped settlers and destroyed the Enclave's base. Under subsequent NCR leadership, aggressive expansionism took hold, especially after President Tandy's death in 2248. General Aaron Kimball's presidency saw further expansion, notably securing Hoover Dam and pushing into the Mojave. However, the NCR's growth led to conflict with the Brotherhood of Steel, severely damaging both factions economically and militarily. The NCR's dominance faced a dramatic setback after Shady Sands was destroyed by a nuclear attack post-2281. This catastrophe destabilized the Republic, allowing the Brotherhood to regain power in certain areas. In the ensuing chaos, smaller factions filled the vacuum left by the NCR's retreat, reshaping the wasteland once again. And this is where we are currently with California during the filming of this video. I'm sure when season 2 of the Fallout TV show drops, we'll get more info on not only California, but also the Mojave. So make sure you stick around because we'll cover all that info when it drops.
If you've played Fallout New Vegas, then you know Arizona pops up quite a bit within the game, whether it's specific locations like the Arizona Spillway located on the eastern side of the Hoover Dam, hearing about it when talking with Dale Barton as he states that trading with the NCR is too expensive, so he usually sticks with doing business in Arizona and New Mexico, or when getting to know Caesar's Legion since he's allegedly expanded into all of Arizona and his main man Legate Lanius was a member of the Hydebarks tribe who hails from the state itself. After the Great War, Arizona was largely fragmented, with each town fighting their neighbors just to survive, and the region so heavily infested with raiders, trade between towns was virtually impossible. The Legion's rise to power served to significantly decrease the violence, with either scaring or killing off all the raiders. So maybe the Legion wasn't entirely terrible. But then again, the Legion crucified members of the Twisted Hares alongside Interstate 40 in Arizona after betraying them at Dry Wells. Further Arizona lore is expanded upon depending on how you play New Vegas 2. For instance, if the Enclave remnants were told to support the Legion in the second Battle of Hoover Dam, Caesar died and the Legion defeats the NCR. It is stated that the remnants were pursued by Legionnaires into Arizona, losing hundreds of Legionnaires in the process and gaining nothing in return. If Caesar dies or is killed prior to you visiting Zion Canyon, Joshua Graham can mention traveling into Arizona as part of his missionary work as well as remarking on Caesar's death. Caesar's Legion is perhaps the biggest piece of Fallout lore that introduces us to the state itself, whether you're talking to the followers of the Apocalypse that mention Arizona when describing those impacted by Caesar's Legion, or simply roaming the Mojave, you're bound to get insight into the close ties the Legion has within this beautiful state.
A pre-war newspaper known as the Boston Bugle had once reported that American troops were fighting in the Great War from Anchorage, Alaska to China. And this is made apparent for the small minority of us that have played Fallout 76. Since if you ever take a stroll in the converted munitions factory, a supervisor questions why they have stockpiles of bullets in the factory instead of sending them to Alaska. The mining headquarters location in 76 also talks of the deteriorating situation in the Great Wilderness of Alaska, if you ever find the time to pop open one of the terminals there too. However, if you're an OG fan of the series and have played Fallout 3, you may have seen the US declaration of war on China, and although there's multiple scrolls to this declaration, there is mention of Alaska in these articles. So clearly, as we all know, Alaska was a front line for the Great War. The People's Republic of America radio also chatters about the quote Alaska Front, further alluding to the importance of this state in the war. We also know that Liberty Prime has mentioned Alaska as well. It states that its mission is the liberation of Anchorage, Alaska, and the only reason a location needs to be liberated is if it's unliberated, alluding to Anchorage not holding the front lines like it was intended to. And our boy Reginald Rothschild, or Scribe Rothschild, mentions apparently Liberty Prime was meant to help liberate Alaska from the Chinese, but was never completed. They were forced to go in without him. One of the few remnants of Anchorage actually lies in a character known as Constantine Chase, who was a pre-war United States Army general and commanding officer of the Anchorage Reclamation, a military operation that repelled Chinese forces from Alaska in January 2077. The Lone Wanderer encounters and receives orders from a computer-generated reconstruction of Chase during their run-through of the Anchorage Reclamation simulation in the Fallout 3 add-on Operation Anchorage. As the Lone Wanderer, this add-on gives us the full glimpse into the greatest battle of the Fallout universe, the liberation of Anchorage from the occupying Red Chinese troops. This simulation is set during the Anchorage campaign, which occurred between June 2076, when the T-51B power armor was first introduced, and January 2077, when Chinese forces were completely driven out of Alaska. Evidence locatable in the Outcast Outpost makes it clear that the simulation is not an accurate recreation of the battle in many important ways. However, these ways are never detailed but are blamed on General Chase, who was the military correspondent for the simulation program. Aside from the blurred reality in this simulation, the remnants of the Alaskans' important lore in Fallout can be found in tidbits of items or characters, such as the Hubris Comics Summer 2077 schedule including Tales from the Front, Alaska Unbowed. Or when John Elwood in Fallout 4 wrote to his colleague Wilfred Bergman that although he may have been better hacker of the two during college, more advanced security measures had been developed while he was away fighting in Alaska. So what do we know about Alaska now? Nothing. But I would assume it's probably one of the most ravaged regions in the US thanks to the war. The nuclear winters and possible mutated polar bears would probably make any wastelander think again before traveling there. But who knows? Before the war, Ashton was a small but strategically vital city in the American Southwest, near the border of California and Nevada. It sat alongside its neighbor, Hopeville, and together they housed multiple Army-owned nuclear missile bases. Also, these cities, Ashton and Hopeville, only exist in the Fallout universe. Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Each base contained silos full of ICBMs, part of the pre-war ballistic defense network. On October 23, 2077, the bombs fell, and Ashton burned with the rest of the world. What's ironic is that the missiles sitting beneath the city never launched. Nearly 200 years later, Ashton saw a second life. A hardy group of settlers formed a small community near the ruins, alongside Hopeville. They called themselves the Divide. Some saw it as the beginnings of a new nation rising from the ashes of the old world. Their location along a sparse but active trade route made Ashton and Hopeville a crucial link between the Mojave Wasteland, the east, and the New California Republic to the west. The NCR used this route to supply and reinforce its hold on the Hoover Dam, and that caught the attention of Caesar's Legion, who tried and failed to sever that connection. Even with all the Legion raids, the settlement endured, until tragedy came from an unexpected source. The very courier who had helped the community grow was hired by the NCR to deliver a package retrieved from Navarro. Neither the NCR nor the courier knew that this package contained active nuclear launch codes. When it was brought home to the Divide, it awakened the dormant missiles beneath Ashton and Hopeville. One by one, the warheads detonated, tearing the ground apart in a chain of explosions so violent they reshaped the land itself. Highways split, buildings twisted into skeletal frames, and the earth cracked open. The destruction left Ashton a graveyard of metal and stone. Ruined overpasses hang broken above streets littered with rusting cars. Makeshift camps cling to the wreckage inhabited by the marked men. They're the ghoulified remains of both NCR troops and Legion soldiers who were caught in these blasts. Exposure to the Divide's brutal storms and radiation has left them with a constant state of slow decay. Their survival is definitely more a curse than it is a blessing. When the courier returned in 2281, a single missile silo remained intact. What happens with that missile is up to the courier.
Founded in 1838, Beckley was a coal town through and through. For generations, its mine was the heart of the community, powering both the local economy and its identity. When the mine eventually closed, the city tried to preserve its heritage with a museum, the Beckley Coal Mine Exhibit, celebrating the industry that had built it. But by the late 21st century, Beckley wasn't just a quiet historical stop. It was the birthplace of Shannon Rivers, famed for voicing the Mistress of Mystery, and home to one of the most heated pre-war rivalries in Appalachia. The sandwich shop showdown between Sal's Grinders and Big Papa Mo's Lip Smackin' Sandwich Shack. Life in Beckley, however, was far from peaceful. Like much of Appalachia, the city became a flashpoint in the bitter labor disputes of the era. Workers clashed with corporate giants Atomic Mining Services and Hornwright Industrial, who pushed to replace human miners with robots. Protests escalated into riots, and by the time of the Great War, the situation was volatile enough for the National Guard to step in. Assisted by Robco's strikebreaker robots and armed with hallucinogen gas, their orders were simple and brutal: pacify or kill the protesters. When the bombs fell, Beckley's unrest froze in place. The miner blockade still stood long after the war, particularly on the north side of town. Raiders eventually took advantage of the defenses, using them to fortify their own positions, but they too were killed or driven out by 2102. The strikebreaker robots never left. To this day, iBots, Protectrons, Mr. Gutsies, and a Robo-Brain patrol the streets, while feral ghouls haunt the rooftops. Most of the buildings are destroyed or boarded up, but a few landmarks remain. Sal's Grinders still stands, its entrance leading to the upper levels of town. Up on the rooftops, wooden shacks left from the pre-war days cling to the edges, connected by bridges. West of town lies the Beckley Coal Mine Exhibit Public Workshop, a cue to the city's past. Eastward is a rest stop with scavengeable supplies, and down the intersection, boarded up storefronts mark the scars of Beckley's decline. Loot is sparse, and the streets can be dangerous. Beckley in Fallout 76 mirrors its real-world counterpart in West Virginia, right down to the coal mine exhibit. But in the Wasteland, it's more than a preserved piece of history since it's frozen from the chaos before the bombs, where corporate greed, worker defiance, and military force collided, and where the ghosts of that conflict still walk beside the machines built to crush it. Pulling away from Beckley's barricaded streets and strikebreaker patrols, the road winds north through the Appalachian Hills until the landscape softens and we get away from the hellhole of Ash Heap. The air here feels different, calmer, almost untouched, and for good reason. We've reached Berkeley Springs, one of the few places in West Virginia that escaped the direct wrath of the bombs. Before the war, Berkeley Springs was pride of the Eastern Spa Circuit, famous for America's first spa in the state park. It was a haven for the wealthy who snapped up mansions and high-end apartments and poured their money into local businesses. But affluence didn't bring grace. The service sector flourished, but so did entitlement. When the spa raised its prices to survive the collapsing economy, the idle rich, cruising around in fast cars and living in luxury, cried foul. When the bombs fell, the spa town's untouched status became both a blessing and a curse. Refugees poured in, and the local clinics strained under the weight of an unending influx of sick and wounded. By late October 2077, supplies were vanishing faster than they could be replaced. Even an Army vertibird drop couldn't turn the tide. By November, the situation was desperate. Fusion cores for backup generators were being scavenged from abandoned cars, and every bandage, sterile instrument, and dose of medication was accounted for. On November 6th, the clinic had nothing left. 5 days later, raiders stormed in, killing the 2 soldiers left on ground, gunning down a nurse who resisted, and taking what remained. The surviving staff and patients abandoned the town soon after, heading south to Charleston. In Fallout 76, Berkeley Springs is a mid-sized settlement cut by a narrow canal and anchored by South Washington Street. Shops and boarded storefronts line the main road, including Dr. Barnaby's Pharmacy locked behind a high-security terminal and worth the effort for its stash of chems. Across the canal sits a brick-built city hall reinforced with turrets, and beyond that, the beauty and spa salon. Residential streets branch off from the main drag, dotted with partially destroyed houses and intact mansions, some hiding workshop terminals and loot. In the wasteland, the beauty of Berkeley Springs hides its scars. The water still flows, the spa buildings still stand, but the town that once catered to the rich now belongs to the scavengers, ghouls, and survivors who can hold it, if only for a while.
Boulder City was originally built in 1931 by the Bureau of Reclamation and 6 companies. It was a carefully planned, government-run company town to house workers building the Hoover Dam. It wasn't just a place to crash, but a tiny monitored community. Alcohol and gambling were banned, since it was the Prohibition era and right next to the rowdy Las Vegas. And anyone who wanted to set up shop or visit needed permits. As far as when the bombs were falling, we know that Boulder City was pretty much left unscathed. It just became a little frontier town like most of the outskirts cities in Nevada. Well, at least for a little while. But what eventually flattened Boulder City wasn't nukes, but a product of post-war factions. During the first Battle of Hoover Dam, the New California Republic lured the toughest Legion soldiers into Boulder City, which had been rigged with explosives. As a result, the town was blown to bits to crush Caesar's Legion's offensive. Lieutenant Monroe puts it plainly.
The sharpshooters and the Rangers picked off the Legion's veterans from a distance, and the rest of the Legion just rushed on in. Then boom.
After that boom, Boulder City was basically a ghost town. Most buildings were rubble save for a few like the concrete mixing yard near the train station and the Bighorn Saloon. What was left became a pit stop for caravans and NCR troops, especially since the saloon served as a rough and ready hangout. And concrete, when it was available, was vital for building fortifications, but the supply chain wasn't smooth sailing. Quarry Junction, where limestone came for the concrete, got overrun by Deathclaws, which basically stopped the deliveries cold. That left the town idle and just dusty ruins. You can wander through it now, and it's more memory than it is life.
Before the Great War, Bramwell was no ordinary small town in Appalachia. Once a modest community, it became a playground for the ultra-rich, transformed into a skyline of mega mansions that towered over the ash heap. These skyscraper-like estates housed Appalachia's wealthiest residents and pushed out regular citizens, cementing the town's reputation for exclusivity and excess. But opulence couldn't shield it from unrest. During the automation riots, disgruntled ex-miners led by O'Connor used stolen explosives to bring down one of these massive homes. The riots reflected the wider struggle across the region, as corporations and government forces tried to crush dissent from workers furious over being replaced by machines. When the bombs fell in 2077, Bramwell's wealthy elite scattered, abandoning their monolithic estates to the encroaching ash and soot from nearby Mount Blair. In the years after, the responders' fire breathers ventured into the area in search of survivors but found none. What they did recover was the excavator power armor intended for future operations. While Bramwell never appears as a marked in-game location in Fallout 76, its legacy lives on throughout the estates, the unfinished mansion along with the Appalachian monorail, and in terminal entries that chart its role as a symbol of pre-war wealth and post-war ruin. To Today it stands in the Fallout lore as a place whose fall mirrored the collapse of the world itself.
Searchlight, Nevada in the Fallout universe was a small NCR military outpost and a residential town. It sat along the highway between the Mojave Wasteland and the NCR Heartland, acting as a rest stop and a minor hub for travelers and caravans heading east. The town also had a functioning church and civilian homes. On the military side, the NCR stationed a garrison here, along with support staff and families. Nothing about Searchlight was really flashy. NCR troops reported problems with supplies, but the base wasn't exactly high priority compared to places like Hoover Dam. Searchlight's disaster didn't happen in 2077. It came much later in 2281. A Legion infiltrator disguised as an NCR trooper smuggled in radioactive waste into the camp and sabotaged the base. The waste was spread around the area and released, bathing the town and the military installation in lethal radiation. It was fast and ugly. People were cooked from the inside out in minutes. Some died on the spot, others turned into ghouls. The Legion called it a gift, and their plan worked perfectly, wiping out the NCR presence without a single Legion soldier having fired a shot. By the time the courier arrives, Camp Searchlight is a glowing graveyard. The streets are empty except for the wind and feral ghouls that wander around where soldiers used to stand guard, and the buildings are falling apart under the constant radiation. A handful of NCR survivors are holed up in a nearby church, and they're too scared and sick to leave. They can't even bury their dead without risking more contamination. The NCR presence is officially gone, and the Legion has no reason to occupy the site. It's basically unlivable. Searchlight went from being a nice pit stop to a cautionary tale about how in the Mojave War, the fight isn't always won with bullets. Sometimes it's won with a single dirty trick. We don't have any official in-universe details on what Canyon City, Oregon was doing before the Great War. There's no lore or no vault connections and no NCR or pre-war faction links. But we do know a little post-bombs, thanks to a little game called Fallout Tactics, which by the way is like canon-ish, so keep that in mind if we bring it up in this video. In Fallout Tactics, Canyon City appears as a post-war location under the control of the Calculator's forces during the Brotherhood of Steel's Midwestern campaign. The city is defended by robots and serves as one of the main battle zones in the game. Beyond that, the game gives no insight into the local population, history, or how it ended up being under robotic control. Once the Brotherhood defeats the defending forces, the city falls under their influence. That's the only confirmed post-war event tied to the name Canyon City in any Fallout media. Still, it's pretty nice to have something to chew on. We don't have any straight up pre-war history for Carbon. It's never shown or talked about. Also, what we do have takes place in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, and unlike Tactics, this game is mostly regarded as non-canon, I believe. But during and after the war, we do have some stuff. Carbon is built on top of a massive crater caused by the Great War, so half of the old town actually fell into the earth when the nukes hit. So it's just that crater and that part of town that didn't collapse into it. This is where Fallout Brotherhood of Steel steps in. Carbon is a small farming town in the game. People grow crops and raise Brahmin, the two-headed cows. There's a mayor there named Richard running things, but the Brotherhood sends in an initiate on a mission to find the paladins in the area. The town is split into chunks, east, west, north, and center, and the big crater that sits nearby. There's a bar there, the Atomic Diner, a warehouse, a mill, and the whole place is under constant threat from raiders. The initiate helps fight off attacks, rescues people, and even ends up replacing the mayor with the town doctor, Vidya. And that's pretty much the full story. After the bombs, Carbon becomes an average wasteland town under siege, with the Brotherhood's meddling in local politics, all in the Brotherhood of Steel timeline.
Charleston was the capital of West Virginia and one of the largest cities in Appalachia. It was a political and industrial hub and also a flashpoint for unrest. Governor Evans, a staunch ally of corporate interests, championed automation despite fierce union opposition, with resistance led by figures like Senator Sam Blackwell. The city became the heart of Appalachia's automation push, even as protesters for workers' rights erupted across its streets. Hornwright Industrial, headquartered here, stood as both a symbol of economic aspirations and the target of bitter labor disputes. When the Great War came, Charleston was spared the worst of the destruction. Its survival allowed it to serve as the heart of Appalachian Reconstruction. An emergency government formed in the intact Capitol building, working alongside the first responders to restore order. But the flood of refugees soon overwhelmed the city's ability to provide aid, denying help to desperate survivors from Pleasant Valley Ski Resort and Top of the World proved costly. Those same survivors, led by David Thorpe, became one of Appalachia's most feared raider gangs. On Christmas morning in 2082, Thorpe's retaliation came in the form of a mini-nuke that destroyed the Summersville Dam, unleashing a flood that devastated Charleston and wiped out much of the responders' resources and people. In the years that followed, Charleston was largely abandoned, its mud-choked streets and toppled buildings left to the wild. Super mutants, scorched, snallygasters, and other monsters roamed the ruins where the state's government once stood. The fire breathers used the gutted city as a training ground, headquartered in the Charleston Fire Department, while remnants like Wade Airport, the Charleston Train Yard, and AVR Medical Center hint at the city's former scale. Today, only one human resident, Nash, calls Charleston home. Lonely bastard. Clarksburg is one of those small Appalachia towns in Fallout 76 that really sells the idea of, this used to be a place people lived. In the pre-war world, it was every bit a functioning city. Shopping, community, all of that in the heart of what became the Toxic Valley. You would expect the typical grocery store, pharmacy, post office, church, hardware store, gun shop, and even a private shooting club, and your expectations would be met. All the building blocks of small town life were there. Tragically, everything changed. The region was torn apart by man vs. robot protests before the bombs fell. And when the Great War hit, the Toxic Valley's industrial runoff poisoned more than just the air. The water turned sickening, and slowly the population drained away. Most fled to Morgantown for safer water and more stable ground. For a long time, only 3 souls remained: Jill, Andy, and Cooper Lou. Then, as fate would have it, a Yaoguai attacked. Only Cooper lived, and even she eventually decided Clarksburg was no place to stay and set out for survivors elsewhere. Eventually, the town didn't stay empty. Raiders showed up holding the shanty town center with makeshift defenses. By 2102, they were gone, routed, or dead. A year later, a doctor set up camp just outside Clarksburg, taking soil samples to evaluate how deep the toxins ran. If you come across Clarksburg today in 76, you're hit with a real sense of decay. What I enjoy is that Clarksburg is based directly on the real West Virginia town, and some of its buildings match real-world counterparts. The in-game theater mirrors the Robinson Grand Performing Arts Center, while the hardware store and factory buildings relay the old Standard Mill complex on Clark Street and North 6 in real Clarksburg. Clarksburg shows how fragile small town life can be around Appalachia. It's not a city turned vault or a cynical raider base. It's a place where real families used to live, where community slipped away one poisoned well at a time. As a player, Clarksburg has a weird pull. It's kind of this creepy, busted town in the middle of BFE. You get to roam through the cracks of daily life before the bombs, piecing together journals like Cooper Lou's, learning who lived there, what they feared. In the grand tour of Fallout's world, Clarksburg matters because it brings us closer to the story of Appalachia as it slipped from civilization's edge. Not with grand events, but with quiet failure of the everyday.
Again, like a lot of these towns, it's pretty much radio silence. Fallout Tactics doesn't mention any nuclear attack or fallout affecting Coldwater. The game's focus is well after the war. Also, I forgot to mention that Tactics tends to change geography a little bit. Some places and towns aren't like they are in our universe. So once again, keep that in mind as well. Post-war though, Coldwater is a busted up settlement built on top of the old pre-war city's ruins. It's multi-layered, literally. The town split into levels or tiers like a little stack of neighborhoods that go up instead of out. It's known in the region for having a casino and a mix of humans and ghouls living there. The place gets overrun by a gang called the Red Stingers, who are criminals from Quincy who wear stolen Brotherhood of Steel armor and drive a stolen vehicle. How they did that is poison some Brotherhood paladins, steal their gear, and use it to take over the town. Then your Brotherhood squad, led by a character known as the Warrior, storms in. You fight through the tiers, save Adele Dudley, deal with the bandits, and then collect 3 sets of broken power armor to return to the Auditor General. That's pretty much all the post-war story Coldwater gets in official lore. After the bombs, Freeport shows up as the Brotherhood of Steel mission site in the Midwestern campaign. By this time, it's under the control of raiders who've been terrorizing the region. The Brotherhood sends the Warrior and their squad to clear out the place. The fight takes you through fortified streets and heavily defended positions, with the raiders using every scrap of cover they can find. Once the Brotherhood secures the city, it becomes part of their growing territory in the Midwest. Fallout Tactics doesn't offer much beyond the battle itself. Unfortunately, there are no details about the surviving population or rebuilt industries or even the long-term role in the Brotherhood's plans. The only confirmed canon is that it was hostile territory taken by force and then folded into the Brotherhood's control, which is pretty much the entire game of Fallout Tactics.
This place was once a quiet forested town along the Flatwoods River, known for its local motel, tavern, church, and the regional legend of the Flatwoods Monster. Entry signs proudly declared it the home of the Green Monster, a declaration to its folkloric claim to fame. In Vault-Tech's pre-war projections, the town's survivability in a nuclear event wasn't promising. Its small size and limited resources made it very vulnerable. Still, Flatwoods was home to a tight-knit community, including Reverend Delbert Winters, a lifelong resident who served the congregation in the local church. Life here moved at a slower pace, far from the industrial conflicts consuming other parts of Appalachia. When the bombs fell, Flatwoods avoided direct destruction but faced the same chaos that gripped the rest of the region. The responders chose it as one of their first post-war outposts, using Winters' church as a hub to train volunteers, distribute food and water, and give survivors a purpose. Under Winters' guidance, the group taught skills as basic and vital as cooking after seeing people resort to eating raw, irradiated meat. But like many towns in the forest region, Flatwoods couldn't escape loss. Most of its residents perished or fled, leaving only scattered bodies and memories behind. By 2102, the only living inhabitants are Heather Ellis and her dog Chloe, working to revive the responders with the tools left in place. The town's streets remain largely intact, with the Green Country Lodge, Tavern, Red Rocket Station, and Community Garden still standing. This was a community that once tried to rebuild, but now survives as little more than a waypoint for Vault 76 dwellers heading into the wider wasteland.
Before the bombs, Goodsprings was a small desert town in Nevada, and in the Fallout universe, it carried on much like it does in real life, just rural and off the beaten path. The game never tells us about a crazy pre-war twist like a secret vault or a weird experiment happening here. It was just a normal place that managed to avoid the big flashy targets on Nuke Day. Goodsprings wasn't hit directly. Its location away from major military or industrial sites kept it out of the blast zones, but that doesn't mean it came through untouched. Like the rest of the Mojave, it was caught in the wider environmental damage and resource collapse that followed, but it wasn't reduced to a crater or drowned in radiation. And in Fallout, that's about as lucky as you can get. Goodsprings kept going as a tiny, tight-knit settlement. By the events of Fallout New Vegas in 2281, it's still standing, with a handful of residents who know each other by name. There's Doc Mitchell, the town doctor, Trudy, who runs the Prospector Saloon, Easy Pete, who's a retired prospector, and of course a few others. The town gets pulled into the Courier's story right off the rip. Benny's crew tries to bury the Courier in a shallow grave here, and Doc Mitchell is the one who saves you. Depending on your choices, Goodsprings can either stay free and independent after a showdown with the Powder Gangers, or end up under their control. Either way, it's one of the rare settlements in Fallout that feels like a real community. It's alive and kind of thriving at this point. That is, unless some psycho with a head wound decides to switch things up. Where Great Bend shows up is in Fallout Tactics, long after the war. By the time the Brotherhood of Steel's Midwestern chapter reaches it, the city has turned into a heavily fortified base for the Beast Lords. These guys are a raider tribe that can control mutated animals and use them in combat, which sounds pretty badass honestly. Great Bend is their stronghold, full of trained Deathclaws, Rad Scorpions, and other wasteland creatures. The Beast Lords have walled off the city and set up watchtowers. Then they filled the streets with both human guards and animal patrols. The Brotherhood's mission here is to break that control. The Warrior and their squad fight through both the Beast Lords and their creatures, then capture their leader and effectively end the Beast Lord threat in the region. After that, Great Bend falls under Brotherhood control, though the game doesn't go into detail about whether the civilian population remained or how the city was rebuilt. What is confirmed is that by the end of the mission, it stops being a Beast Lord capital and becomes another outpost in the Brotherhood's growing territory. And I'm sure you didn't see that one coming.
Founded in 1856 and celebrated as the birthplace of Mother's Day, Grafton grew into a major retail and industrial hub for north-central West Virginia. The creation of Grafton Dam bolstered both its infrastructure and tourism, which eventually rivaled and in some areas surpassed its steel production industry. By the 21st century, the city's economy was anchored by Grafton Steel, one of the largest mills in the region and a government-preferred war contractor. This status granted it license to crush labor laws and ignore environmental safeguards, devastating the local ecosystem and endangering workers. By mid-2077, toxic sludge fouled the waterways, injuries and deaths mounted, and demands to shut the mill down reached the governor's desk. Of course, only to be ignored. Surprise, surprise. In September, after months of sabotage and intimidation, workers launched a full strike, halting steel production and triggering federal surveillance for suspected communist activity. As the bombs fell, Grafton avoided immediate destruction, but not the slow death that followed. Automation had already crept into the city governance, with the mainframe installed to assist the mayor. After society collapsed, the AI assumed full control, becoming increasingly erratic as the toxic valley decayed around it. The responders established trading posts at the station and town hall, but the streets became dangerous, prowled by super mutants and other threats, like a big-ass monster named after the town. Once a thriving center of industry and community, Grafton is now a polluted ruin. Its toxic river a permanent scar from the corporate abuses of the past, and its mayor a glitch of how far the city has fallen. Survivors pass through, scavenging what they can, but the Grafton that celebrated Mother's Day and boomed with steel is long gone, replaced by a hollow shell haunted by its own history. Harper's Ferry at one point was a small but historically rich town whose tourism industry relied on its scenic location at the meeting of two big rivers. In the decades leading up to 2077, it became the epicenter of the Free States movement, a fiercely independent group skeptical of the government's vault program and determined to construct personal bunkers throughout the mire. While loyalists saw them as a paranoid conspiracy theorists, their presence rattled the local economy, driving away patriotic tourists. Tensions escalated as the Sino-American War intensified. The government began pressuring local business owners for the names of suspected Free States members, the clinic refused treatment to known affiliates, and by mid-year, the military was seizing property under charges of sedition. The bombs spared Harper's Ferry from immediate annihilation, and it briefly became a hub for reconstruction efforts. Refugees flowed into the town, straining its resources, and in 2078, Vault 94 extended an invitation to survivors. Suspicious of the vault's motives, Mayor Miranda Vox sent an armed group to investigate, a decision that ended in catastrophe. Convinced the hospitality was a trap, the group massacred the vault's leaders and destroyed its GEC, triggering a nuclear explosion that further mutated the mire. Despite past tensions, the returning Free States aided in rebuilding, turning Harper's Ferry into a fortified trading post by 2084. That recovery, however, was short-lived. In 2086, the Scorched Plague swept through the town, killing many and forcing the Free States back into their bunkers. With the automated anti-air defenses eventually breached by Scorched Beasts, Harper's Ferry fell, its fortifications and armories abandoned. Clay, leader of the Free States, ordered all remaining survivors to abandon the area. Today, the fortified hilltop, church-turned barracks, and scattered defenses are relics of a town that resisted both government oversight and the post-war chaos, but was ultimately undone by the very wasteland it fought to survive.
Henderson was home to Repcon Aerospace, a major pre-war company known for building rockets and experimenting with alternative fuels like plasma and fission-based power. This made Henderson one of the Mojave's hubs for cutting-edge tech, with the Repcon headquarters standing as its most recognizable landmark. The work being done there tied directly into the broader pre-war arms race, putting the city on the map in Fallout's alternate history. When the bombs fell, there's no recorded account of Henderson being directly targeted, but the survival of the Repcon building means it pretty much avoided a full-scale blast, which I feel is pretty surprising. I would have expected it to be a target. It may have still been hit by shockwaves and fallout, but enough of the structure and its system remained intact to function decades later. The Repcon headquarters became a strange time capsule. Long after the city around it had faded into the wasteland, the building's automated security systems, sentry bots, and facial recognition tech still patrolled the empty halls. Decades of abandonment left it dusty and quiet, but in true Fallout fashion, the pre-war tech stubbornly kept running. Repcon is kinda known for that. Anyways, that building is pretty much the only interesting thing left in Henderson. Hopeville, like we talked about earlier, was a thriving military hub and also an exclusive to the Fallout universe. This city doesn't actually exist in real life. It was a major missile base for the United States, loaded with silos and stockpiles of nuclear weapons. The town itself grew around the base, with soldiers, their families, and civilian workers all living nearby. This made Hopeville more than just another California desert town, as it was a key piece of America's pre-war nuclear arsenal, with infrastructure and manpower dedicated to maintaining and potentially launching those missiles if war broke out. When the bombs fell, Hopeville didn't get hit in the first wave. Its downfall came later through a series of unfortunate events. The remaining nukes that were left underground ended up firing off thanks to the Courier and the NCR. Not on purpose, mind you, but you know, it's a whole thing. The launch of its nuclear arsenal caused massive secondary detonations that devastated the surrounding area. The base and the town were obliterated in the process. Hopeville remained a dead zone, and by the events of Lonesome Road, it's a ghostly, ash-choked ruin deep in the Divide. The streets are buried in dust storms, buildings are collapsed, and the old missile silos stand like tombstones. Surviving structures are rigged with traps and home to hostile marked men, which are of course the ghoulified survivors from the Divide's endless storms, usually the soldiers from both the NCR faction and Caesar's Legion. The place is so unstable that even walking through it risks triggering dormant warheads buried underneath the rubble. Obviously there's a hell of a lot more to this place, but if we covered everything in the Divide, that video would be just as long as this entire video. Just reminding you guys that we really are just covering the basics of all these places, because otherwise this thing would go on for days.
Founded in 1869 by Swiss and German immigrants, Helvetia was a thriving mountain village known for its skilled craftsmen, musicians, cheesemakers, and stonemasons. Its rich cultural traditions endured for over a century with the Fastnacht Day celebration, a colorful parade ending in the burning of an effigy of Old Man Winter, becoming a signature event. For outsiders like me, burning effigies sounds weird as shit, but you know what? I'd attend. To ease the workload, the town invested in Protectron robots, which doubled as a tourist draw for visitors eager to experience Helvetia's unique blend of European heritage and Appalachian charm. Even in the decades leading to the Great War, Helvetia maintained its identity as a cultural hub, with themed buildings, specialty shops, and restaurants preserving its old-world feel. Once the bombs fell, the town's tight-knit community held together for a time, but mounting pressures pushed it to the brink. When a Horizon Airlines jet crashed nearby, locals salvaged the wreckage to build a new settlement at Horizon's Rest. Not long after, Helvetia was abandoned entirely, likely due to the approach of the Reavers Raider gang. In the years since, the Scorched have claimed its streets, and the cult of the Mothman once used the church as a shrine, leaving behind a shadowed effigy in place of the altar. Today, Helvetia remains a blurry shadow of its former self. Huntersville was once a quiet, isolated West Virginia town on the verge of fading away. That changed in early 2075 when West Tech and the US government offered a rural development grant. Within months, Huntersville had a modern-day recycling system, new sewer lines, and a growing economy bolstered by the newly established West Tech Research Center on its outskirts. The townsfolk didn't ask too many questions about their secretive new neighbors, especially once money started flowing in. Even when West Tech began paying for testing rights to the local water supply, the promise of a brighter future seemed worth the trade. But that prosperity hid a dark truth. West Tech's improvements were a cover for contaminating Huntersville's drinking water with the forced evolutionary virus. By early 2076, the experiment's effects began to surface. Residents fell ill with a strange flu that caused hair loss, skin discoloration, and severe deformities. West Tech's doctors insisted it was nothing serious, convincing families to stay indoors while hazmat-clad soldiers enforced a strict quarantine. The reality was far worse. Huntersville was becoming the birthplace of Appalachia's first super mutants. As the mutations worsened, violence erupted. The 12th Mountain Division guarded the town, but their orders were to protect the experiment, not the people. When Sergeant Jake tried to expose what was happening, he was court-martialed and replaced with a far more compliant officer. By the time the bombs fell in October 2077, Huntersville was already a nightmare, a ghost town filled with violent, inhuman creations. In the decades after the war, the ruins of Huntersville became a battleground. Raiders avoided it, knowing the water was poisoned, but the Enclave saw potential in reviving West Tech's work. By 2082, new generations of super mutants poured out of the area, clashing with the Responders and the Brotherhood of Steel. These tensions culminated in the bloody Battle of Huntersville in 2086, where the Brotherhood and Responders temporarily drove the mutants out, but at great costs. For those who died, well, their graves still lie just south of town, showing that victory never lasts. By 2102, the super mutants had reclaimed Huntersville once more, turning the birthplace of Appalachia's most infamous monstrosities back into their stronghold.
Jean was a tiny stop along Interstate 15 in Nevada, mostly known for its prison facility. In the Fallout universe, it stays the same. The Jean skydiving building and surrounding area served travelers and the nearby prison. It wasn't a major economic or military hub. It was just one of those small desert communities that existed because of the road and the infrastructure around it. There's no record of Jean being directly targeted, and its small size probably meant it wasn't high on anyone's list. If it did take any damage, it would have been from the shockwaves and fallout drifting from the strikes on bigger targets like Las Vegas or even Nellis Air Force Base. Whatever structures were there at the time seem to have been damaged but not completely erased. Jean is little more than a ruin on the edge of the Mojave. The most notable landmark is the skydiving building, which is still there, but it's abandoned and looted. The NCR Correctional Facility that was built on the old prison site became home to the Powder Gangers after they staged a violent breakout. Jean itself has no active population or functioning community outside of the Powder Gangers, but I don't know if I would consider them a functioning community. Jefferson appears in Fallout Tactics as another Brotherhood of Steel mission. By this time, it's under the control of super mutants who have fortified the area. The Brotherhood sends a warrior to clear them out, turning the battle into a major fight for control of the city. Once the mutants are defeated, yep, you guessed it, Jefferson is now part of the Brotherhood of Steel territory. It's a tale as old as time at this point. Junction City shows up in Fallout Tactics as a mid-sized, self-reliant town in Kansas that flat out refused to buddy up with the Brotherhood of Steel. The place is run by Mayor John, and the townsfolk include characters like Casey the Mechanic and the bartender Angry Rick. They've got their own defenders, the Enforcers, and even a beat-up humanoid robot from the Calculator's forces. And that piqued the Brotherhood's curiosity, so they sent their squad to fetch the robot parts, and then recruit Casey after you patch up her sick dad. But the mayor only gives up the robot head if the Brotherhood protects them from Reaver attacks. The squad then wipes out the Reavers at their nearby base, gets the robot piece, and earns their trust enough to recruit Casey as a mechanic. The town stays independent, but now with a foot in Brotherhood territory. Kansas City was a major nuclear launch site. It had silos ready to fire, stocked with warheads meant to rain down destruction if things turned south. This wasn't a regular city, but a military backbone of America's pre-war firepower. When the bombs fell, Kansas City didn't escape unscathed. Its status as a missile site meant it was a target, and while the silos may have not been destroyed, the city around them ended up in ruins. The silo staff who survived the apocalypse wound up as ghouls, forming a little community in the center. They named their town Gravestone, built around the last intact nuke they called Plutonius, and they turned it into something kind of like a shrine. A little while later in Gravestone, Gamoran's super mutant army moves in and tries to take over. And then the Brotherhood of Steel shows up. Your squad defends the ghouls and fights off the mutants, and then takes Plutonius in return. They then use this later to bust into Vault Zero. So Kansas City goes from nuclear launch point to ruined idol's shrine to battlefield and strategic prize.
Lewisburg was more than just another West Virginia mining town. It was a community that blended small town charm with creative flair. Voted coolest small town USA in 2061, Lewisburg embraced rooftop gardens, colorful art exhibitions at the Serenity Road Art Gallery, and seasonal street festivals. The annual Spring Garden Festival transformed its streets into a celebration of flowers and fresh produce, even if residents sometimes had to wear gas masks to cope with the region's notoriously poor air quality. On the eve of the Great War, miners were striking along the town's southern edge. Voting was underway, and Halloween celebrations filled the streets with music, food stalls, and a sense of normalcy. In the years after the bombs fell, Lewisburg tried to keep that spirit alive. Survivors rebuilt into a small trading hub with market stalls running the length of the main road and rooftop greenhouses supplying food and flowers. But its festive atmosphere made it a target. Raiders struck during one Spring Garden Festival, taking to the rooftops and slaughtering townsfolk from above. Infamous figures like Bleeding Kate used the town as hunting ground, while others like the Order of Mysteries and Natasha Hunt made their last stand here. Lewisburg now is a haunting blend of beauty and ruin. Its art galleries and festivals streets now overrun by scorched, yet still bearing traces of the vibrant town that once made it the pride of Greenbrier County. Monongah was a struggling mining town deep in the Savage Divide, its economy buckling under a prolonged downturn in coal production. In April 2075, salvation seemed to arrive when Hornwright Industrial Mining Company swooped in with an offer: financial aid for the town in exchange for exclusive rights to the nearby Monongah mine. For a brief moment, prosperity returned, but the mine's centuries-old coal seams were nearly tapped out, and Hornwright's fleet of auto miners drained the last deposits with ruthless efficiency. By early 2076, the company was packing up. In one desperate night, a group of laid-off miners led by Earl Williams broke into the mine to steal supplies, only for the supervisor, Sykes, to seal them inside with explosives. The trapped miners resorted to cannibalism, and in the decades after the war, their twisted leader would become something far more horrifying: the Wendigo Colossus. Hornwright's payments to Monongah dried up in August 2077, sending the town into economic collapse just weeks before the bombs fell. Any remaining hope vanished as the Great War left Monongah abandoned to the elements. Today, the town sits in a small circle of cracked streets split by a central road, its police station, church, and ruined homes now crawling with mole miners, liberators, and scorched. To the untrained eye, it's just another ghost town. But to those who know its story, Monongah is a place littered with fragments of deals that promise salvation yet deliver ruin.
After the bombs, Macomb shows up in Fallout Tactics as a dangerous, divided place. A Brotherhood of Steel convoy gets ambushed there near a supply route. Civilians and raiders are desperate and starving. You roll in and save the driver, Pilot Christian. Then you fight through the raiders and wipe the place clean with extermination squads. Surviving civilians get sent to labor camps except for one librarian, Philip Wilson, but his fate after the cleanup is never really revealed. This is kind of the nature of Fallout Tactics, as you see. You arrive on a map and usually clear it of enemies with little tidbits of lore. It's why these specific locations will all seem fairly similar. Malden was part of the greater Boston area, and in the Fallout universe it sat near key pre-war facilities. Most famously, it was close to the Malden Middle School, which doubled as a military recruiting center and a National Guard training site. But the school wasn't just for kids. It was repurposed into a pre-war military asset and a vault. It being so close to Boston also meant that Malden was tied into the city's wider pre-war infrastructure and supply network. When the bombs fell, Malden was in the blast radius of strikes on Boston. The condition of its ruins in Fallout 4 makes it pretty clear that it took heavy damage. Radiation levels in the area vary, with some spots like the Malden Center Station and surrounding neighborhoods heavily decayed. Plus, they're overrun with post-war hazards. After the bombs, Malden became part of the Commonwealth's dangerous no man's land. It's a patchwork of collapsed buildings, feral ghoul nests, and faction outposts. The Malden Center area is occupied by raiders, and the old Malden Middle School is now overrun with ferals. Then, of course, you have the nearby Malden drainage system, which is full of mirelurks. There's no organized settlement here anymore, just pockets of danger that scavengers and mercenaries pass through if they have to, and avoid if they can.
Morgantown thrived as a lively riverside city and the proud home of Vault-Tec University. Students from across the country came to study here, and its monorail connected the airport, university, and both ends of the bustling downtown. Shops, bars, and businesses catered to a diverse mix of miners, hunters, military personnel, and travelers. But beneath the prosperity, challenges were brewing. Rising land values drove up rent, and new technologies disrupted local businesses. Still, the city endured, its energy fueled by its academic heartbeat and steady influx of visitors. The bombs changed everything. Chaos gripped Morgantown in the aftermath, and Police Chief Mayfield imposed a harsh curfew, even firing on students accused of looting. Surviving Vault-Tec University students formed rival gangs, the rooftop dominating Roof House and the street claiming Street House, each vying for control over what little remained. Shortages of Radaway turned skirmishes deadly, with radiation slowly killing off the weakest. Turf wars, starvation, and exposure eroded what little order was left, leaving the once proud city split between desperation and decay. Morgantown briefly found new purpose after the Christmas flood of 2082, when the responders, led by Maria, reclaimed the airport as their headquarters. They established various centers, stocked supply caches, and converted Mama Dolce's food processing into a food production facility, even fostering trade routes to Harper's Ferry under Brotherhood of Steel protection. But the city's revival was short-lived. By 2097, the Scorched had overrun Morgantown, wiping out the responders entirely. Now, the streets are filled with feral ghouls, Scorched, and the remnants of a city that once embodied opportunity. If you wander to the city today, Morgantown is a place where history lingers in every shattered lecture hall and rusting monorail track.
Nahant was a coastal town in Massachusetts. It was home to the Nahant Oceanological Society, a research facility focused on marine biology. The group studied marine ecosystems and local species, and the environmental changes in the pre-war Atlantic. And it's nice to see a city focused on scientific research rather than industry or military operations. When the bombs fell, Nahant's fate isn't really described in detail, but its location on the edge of Boston Harbor put it pretty close to the nuclear strikes on the city. A lot of the buildings collapsed or eroded, and the shoreline is littered with all kinds of debris. The Nahant Oceanological Society building itself is still standing though, but it's damaged and abandoned. Nowadays, Nahant is a dangerous little stretch of the Commonwealth. The area is full of ruined homes, fishing shacks, and the remains of that society. Raiders and feral ghouls sometimes wander around the area, and the surrounding waters are infested with mirelurks. There's no sign of any organized settlement, and the pre-war research center has been reduced to little more than a looted shell. Natick was a suburban town in Massachusetts. In Fallout, it was the site of the Natick Banks, a neighborhood with residential housing, a playground, and a small community setup. There's no records of vaults or secret experiments or any other weird pre-war projects tied directly to Natick. so its pre-war life appears to have been pretty ordinary by Fallout standards. After the bombs though, Natick becomes a hazardous part of the Commonwealth. The ruins of Natick Banks are overrun with super mutants, and they've turned it into one of their strongholds. The streets are filled with makeshift barricades and wrecked vehicles. Just another city in the Commonwealth area that is pretty much a hellhole. Common for the Commonwealth. Nelson was a small mining town in Nevada. It was home to the Vicky and Vance Casino's supply lines and had gold mining operations in nearby hills. Its main claim to Fallout-specific history comes from its location in the El Dorado area, where pre-war mining still had some presence. Beyond that, no major military or scientific facilities are tied to it in any official lore. Nelson isn't really mentioned as a direct target, being far from major military installations or big cities like Las Vegas no doubt spared it from the full blast. Any remaining mining operations though would have shut down as society broke apart. After the bombs, Nelson is under the control of Caesar's Legion. It's been taken from the New California Republic after a Legion assault, which left the NCR troops crucified outside the town as a warning. Under Legion control, Nelson serves as a forward position against NCR forces in the Mojave. It's manned by a small garrison of Legion soldiers who enforce the Legion's strict and violent rule over the area. Nipton started life as a regular little railroad stop back in 1905, built for gold miners and ranchers near the California-Nevada line. It was called Nipano Camp at first, then changed to Nipton around 1910, when railroad companies merged. Over time, it turned into a dusty tourist stop. People could rest, resupply, park their RVs, and even try their luck on the state lottery. Great War hit Nipton like most other spots in the wasteland, but the buildings didn't get wiped out. The town still stood, roads, stores, and its hotels all survived the initial blasts. No big story here. Years roll by and Nipton gets seedier. By the late 200s, under Mayor Joseph Stein, the town became a shady pit for gamblers, thieves, and even prostitutes. Basically anyone with caps to spend. He made a deal with Caesar's Legion to hand over both NCR soldiers and powder gangers in exchange for 8,000 caps. But that trade went sideways big time. Enter Vulpes Inculta of the Caesar's Legion. He shows up disguised and lures everyone in, and before they know it, it's a twisted lottery, where the losers get decapitated, crucified, enslaved, or crippled, and only one person will walk away free. Mayor Stein ended up meeting a fiery fate on a pile of burning tires. Ish. Now the town's pretty much a walking nightmare. The roads are lined with crucified corpses, heads on spikes, and burning piles. A showpiece of Legion cruelty. You wander through and meet boxcars in the general store. The only sane voice who's left, telling you the whole story through a quest. Before the bombs, Ogden, Utah was a small but significant city in the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains. It would later become the foundation for New Canaan, but the settlement itself didn't exist before the war. Ogden was a lot like its real-world counterpart. Its location along key trail and highway routes meant it was well connected to Salt Lake City and other regional centers. When the bombs dropped, Ogden was far enough from major military or industrial targets that it likely avoided a direct nuclear strike. That doesn't mean it was safe. Fallout drifted across Utah just like everywhere else, and the collapse of the government and supply chains hit small cities hard. Without major strategic value, Ogden may have been spared the instant annihilation that hit bigger cities, but it still suffered from the slow grind of starvation, resource shortages, and lawlessness that all spread in the aftermath. After the war, the ruins of Ogden became the starting point for a community. New Canaan was founded there centuries later by Mormon missionaries, led by a man named Mordecai. He preserved the religious teachings and values of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The community became known for its stability, education, and emphasis on helping others in the wasteland, qualities that made it both respected and eventually a target. New Canaan thrived on trade and diplomacy, becoming a cultural and spiritual hub in the region, with lots of its people traveling far beyond Utah to spread their beliefs and aid struggling settlements. This peace didn't last forever. By the time of the Honest Hearts DLC, New Canaan had been destroyed by the Whitelegs tribe. They were armed and encouraged by Caesar's Legion. The attack left the city burned and its people scattered. Survivors like Daniel and even Joshua Graham, who's the burned man, carry on the New Canaanite way of life in exile. But the physical settlement of New Canaan is left in ruins basically. I suppose nothing ever lasts in this world. Osceola, hopefully I'm saying that right, has become a post-war stronghold, specifically for the base of Gamoran's super mutant army in Fallout Tactics. The Brotherhood of Steel sends in the Warrior and Squad to blow up the place, and kill Gamoran and rescue any survivors. That's essentially all we get. Mutant threats, Brotherhood assault, and a hardened compound turned battlefield. The mission ends with the base cleared and Gamoran dead, but nothing more is said about what happens to Osceola after that.
This one is quick. Philippi, tucked within the Toxic Valley, holds a quiet but significant place in both real and in-game history. On June 3, 1861, it was the site of the first organized land action of the American Civil War, known as the Battle of Philippi. A Union victory that, while often considered more of a skirmish, marked the opening clash of the Western Virginia campaign. Today, the Philippi Battlefield Cemetery is simply a reminder of that day, commemorated by a plaque honoring the soldiers who fought there. In Fallout 76, Philippi exists as an unmarked location, its digital counterpart based directly on the real West Virginia town where history first echoed across the hills. Other than that, there's not much more to cover here.
Peoria, just like Osceola, becomes a stronghold in Fallout Tactics. A Wachudu tribe lives on an old pre-war bunker full of fusion batteries. The locals think the batteries are magical gateways to the afterlife, and the bunker is guarded by turrets and overrun by rad scorpions and giant roaches. The Brotherhood once again sends in a squad to fetch those batteries. Depending on how you handle the defense system, you either save the villagers or trigger the turrets to attack them. If you spare them, the tribal elder thanks you by giving you the 4th battery. Primm might not be the glitzy strip, but for the travelers heading up the I-15, it's the first taste of neon before New Vegas, and for some, the last place they see before limping home broke. Pre-war, as in today, it was Clark County's poor man's Vegas, a resort stop with cheap thrills and a couple of themed casinos. They also had a cool roller coaster kids would take pride in riding growing up. Bison Steve Casino had El Diablo, the Mojave's largest and most rickety roller coaster, which is actually a real roller coaster at the Buffalo Bills called Desperado. Then we had the Vicky and Vance Casino that was based on the legend of the Bonnie and Clyde style outlaw couple. After the Great War, Primm survived. The NCR's expansion into the Mojave brought caravans, couriers, and soldiers through its streets, reviving it as a small but busy trade hub. It kept its budget Vegas identity alive, a place for those who couldn't make it to the Strip but still wanted a hand of cards and a stiff drink. Unlike Nipton, it kept its reputation for safety thanks to a functioning sheriff's office. That all collapsed in 2281. A breakout of the NCR correctional facility sent waves of violent convicts down the highway. Primm's sheriff and his wife were murdered in their sleep, the deputy taken hostage in the Bison Steed, and the town was effectively under siege. The remaining townsfolk decided to hold up in the Vicky and Vance. Supplies in hand, but no manpower to retake the streets. Traders like Samuel and Michelle cut their losses and moved operations closer to the Strip. The NCR recognized Primm's strategic value, especially with Nipton lost, and they set up a small outpost on the edge of the town under Lieutenant Hayes. But Hayes was undermanned, outgunned, and painfully aware that without reinforcements, Primm would remain in criminal hands. His troops held the line to keep the convicts from pushing south, but the heart of Primm was left to rot. For the Courier, Primm becomes a turning point. You can decide the settlement's fate, restore order with an NCR-appointed sheriff, reprogram the ever-cheerful Primm Slim to enforce the law, or free an ex-NCR convict named Myers to run the place with a frontier justice approach. It's hard to say what Primm is now, because all those choices will change its outcome. I wonder if we'll see it in the show, and what exactly happened to it.
Before the Great War, Summersville was a peaceful lakeside community of just over 700 residents, known for its small-town charm and efficient automated voting system. Multiple voting tents and booths dotted the streets in preparation for upcoming elections, while commercial spaces like the ice cream parlor and laundromat catered to locals. The town was neatly divided into 4 quarters, with the northern half overlooking the reservoir and featuring a church, graveyard, and residential areas, including the home of VTU doctoral candidate Alaya, who kept an experimental schematic crucial to the quest, Trade Secrets. Rooftops were already home to makeshift camps, and civic pride was evident with tattered American flags flying outside the voting tents. After the Great War, Summersville's tranquil atmosphere dissolved into danger. By 2086, the streets saw bloody conflict when Order of Mysteries member Allison Long was betrayed and killed by her ally Olivia Rivers during a raider ambush. In the years that followed, the settlement became a hotspot for violence and was eventually seized by the ruthless Blood Eagles in 2103. Today, its divided quarters are filled with sniper nests, overgrown playgrounds, and scavenged workbenches, while looters pick through the remains of once busy businesses. Its real-world namesake, Summersville, West Virginia, shares the same lakeside setting, though in Appalachia's wasteland, the lake now borders a town defined more by bloodshed than beauty. Founded in 1824, Sutton thrived before the Great War as a hub for the timber industry and regional transport, with railroads, Interstate 59, and a nearby train station keeping the small town connected. That peaceful industry gave way to chaos when the Pleasant Valley Raiders claimed it as a fortified outpost, walling off downtown and turning its storefronts into a stronghold. In one of its darkest chapters, a Raider leader used the church to run a doomsday cult, convincing desperate survivors to surrender their possessions before killing them all in a mass poisoning. The Raiders themselves were eventually wiped out, leaving Sutton a hollowed shell of its former self, its homes and businesses now patrolled only by scavengers and the scorched. Today, Sutton's mix of boarded up houses, looted storefronts, and hidden workbenches offers scattered signs of life, but mostly as a stopover for travelers. The Vault 76 Overseer's childhood home stands here too, adding to the Fallout lore. Main Street's businesses, once a pharmacy, liquor store, and bookstore, are partially blockaded but still hold loot. While the nearby Red Rocket Station, Raider camps, and church tell stories of both community and cruelty. In the real world, Sutton, West Virginia remains a small Appalachian town, but in the wasteland, it's more of a weird hodgepodge of faith and survival and violence commingling. Founded on February 4th, 2042 by Watoga Inc. and funded by Atomic Mining Services, Watoga was envisioned as the city of the future, built atop the site of a real-world ghost town in West Virginia, which is how it made it on the list. Designed to be fully automated, civil services were handled entirely by Robco and General Atomics robots, while the only human authority, the mayor, was randomly selected and assisted by the Mayoral Artificial Intelligence Assistant, MAIA. Despite its sleek promise, the city quickly fell victim to elitism, skyrocketing property prices, and corporate gatekeeping. Residency required approval from Robco management, who often denied applications even from their own full-time employees. Discontent brewed until Robco developer Scott Turner founded the Free Watoga People's Party, ultimately sabotaging the city's robotic services in an event known as Operation Free Watoga, an act that triggered violent chaos just one day before the Great War. In its heyday, Watoga boasted towering skyscrapers, a monorail system, corporate headquarters for AMS, and a bustling shopping plaza. Yet beneath this shine, the city's automation brought mass unemployment, and its wealthy residents voted to limit public services, further isolating the poor. Turner's sabotage, intended to drive evacuation, instead led to the city's emergency robots to attack citizens, cutting short Mayor Barbara Elizabeth's plans to negotiate a truce. When the bombs fell on October 23rd, Turner, racked with guilt, left behind the instructions on how to pacify the corrupted systems. In the post-war decades, the city remained a dangerous blend of scorched ruins and functioning robots, its streets patrolled by assaultrons, protectrons, and the occasional scorched beast overhead. Today, Watoga stands as one of Appalachia's most imposing urban landscapes, with its AMS tower dominating the skyline and its dense network of skybridges, monorail stations, and commercial districts still intact. The Central Administrative Zone links to residential Watoga estates, while the Northeast Commercial District houses brands like Hubris Comics, Super Duper Mart, and Slocum's Joe. A crashed vertibot scars the AMS Plaza, and scorched beast nests cling to high-rises, showcasing the city's long abandonment. While the in-game Watoga is a sprawling metropolis, its real-world namesake in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, is a tiny unincorporated community along the Greenbrier River Trail. Quiet, rural, and worlds away from the automated dystopia its digital counterpart became.
Before the bombs, Washington, D.C. was still the nation's capital, but in Fallout's timeline, it had an even heavier military and research presence than in real history. Government facilities were stockpiling weapons and advanced technology, including prototype power armor and projects like Liberty Prime that were tied to the escalating war with China. The Pentagon remained fully active, housing command centers and classified military programs. The National Mall and Capitol Hill were still operating as the political heart of the country, though wartime rationing and security checkpoints were a regular part of life. Civilian neighborhoods and businesses continued on, but with a constant backdrop of military drills and propaganda urging loyalty and readiness for nuclear conflict. On October 23, 2077, multiple nuclear warheads struck Washington, D.C., delivering direct hits to central government districts. The blasts leveled major landmarks, with much of the mall, the White House, and the surrounding federal buildings either vaporized or left in ruin. The shockwaves ripped through entire neighborhoods, and radiation blanketed the city. The Potomac River became heavily contaminated, making one of the region's main water sources dangerous to touch. The bombing didn't leave much standing, and what wasn't flattened by the initial blast was consumed by firestorms that raged in the hours afterward. The destruction wasn't isolated to just DC's core. Surrounding suburbs and military installations were also targeted, crippling the region's ability to organize any kind of coordinated survival effort. The National Archives, the Museum of History, and other important repositories of American culture were damaged or destroyed, leaving fragments of history scattered in the rubble. The Pentagon itself, while hit, remained partially intact, its deeper structures surviving the blast, something that would prove important in the centuries to come. After the war, the area came to be known as the Capital Wasteland. Super mutants created from experiments in Vault 87 roamed the streets and turned sections of the city into their territory. Raiders carved out strongholds in the ruins, and ghouls haunted the underground tunnels. A few fortified communities managed to survive. That includes Megaton, Rivet City, which was built inside the remains of an aircraft carrier, and of course Tenpenny Tower, a pre-war luxury building turned into a walled fortress. The Brotherhood of Steel set up their headquarters in the remains of the Pentagon, using it as a base to collect and protect pre-war technology. DC's ruins remained rich in valuable tech, but also incredibly dangerous to navigate. The metro system provided underground travel routes that were just as treacherous as the streets above. Landmarks like the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and Jefferson Memorial stood as hollow shells of their former selves, either damaged beyond recognition or repurposed by whatever faction could hold them. While the city never regained anything close to its pre-war glory, it stayed a focal point for anyone chasing the last scraps of America's lost power.
Welch, located in the ash heap region of Appalachia, was already struggling before the Great War as automation from Hornwright Industrial Mining Company displaced human workers. By 2077, unemployment was rising sharply, and Ballot Measure 6 threatened to make full automation mandatory. Atomic Mining Services attempted to seize the opportunity by promising economic revival through the extraction of ultracite, but their methods were ruthless. After an earthquake damaged homes, AMS evicted residents whose land contained the valuable ore, citing resource rights. The townspeople fought back, prompting the National Guard to intervene. These tensions were still raw when the bombs fell, and in the chaos, part of the USSA Deep Sleep spacecraft crashed into Welch's streets, leaving the remains of 3 astronauts separated from their commander Sophia. Post-war, Welch became a scarred wasteland, its buildings cracked and collapsing, its western edge torn apart by shifting ground. Fires smolder endlessly, mole miners roam the streets, and ash roses grow in the cracked pavement. The Central District holds remnants of a gas station, post office, bakery, and pawn shop with scattered workbenches and a U-Minute vending machine. Wooden catwalks connect ruined storefronts, while Duchess's hideout, marked by a Z. Wilson mailbox, sits in a collapsed building on the town's outskirts. Though Fallout 76's version of Welch is an ash-choked ruin, it is based on the real-world town of Welch, West Virginia, which is a small McDowell County community once central to the state's coal mining industry.
Vault City is a settlement in northern Nevada, founded by the survivors of Vault 8. Most post-war communities don't really have high tech, but Vault City kept a lot of its advanced technology intact, making it one of the most developed places in New California. The city is famous for its medical knowledge and exports. Life inside is comfortable and order is maintained for citizens, but outsiders are kept at arm's length, confined primarily to the courtyard unless granted temporary access with a day pass. Citizenship is usually inherited, but in rare cases it can be granted by the ruling council or the first citizen. The city's biggest problem came in the late 2230s, when the town of Gecko that's close by reactivated its nuclear power plant. The plant was in poor shape and began leaking radioactive waste into the groundwater. This led to radiation sickness and even sterility surrounding Vault City's people. Tensions with the ghouls of Gecko escalated quickly, with Vault City refusing any cooperation and even shooting emissaries on site. From then on, hostility defined their relationship. Vault City also resisted pressure from the growing NCR. In the 2240s, the Republic tried to convince Vault City to join by offering protection against raiders. When that didn't work, New Reno's Bishop family was pushed to organize fake raider attacks to wear the city down. Vault City still stayed independent, but its isolationist stance has made it enemies on every side. The city itself is divided into a few key areas. Outsiders stay in the courtyard, which has shops and rough living spaces. Downtown is where citizens work and trade, but outsiders with a day pass can visit parts here. The Central Council District holds government buildings and housing for citizens, while Vault 8 remains intact and is mostly used for storage and power. Vault 8's reactor still provides the city's energy, but its limited capacity keeps the settlement from expanding far beyond its walls. Arafu is one of the smaller settlements in the capital wasteland, perched on top of a ruined overpass northwest of Vault 106. By 2277, only 4 houses remain occupied, and the population has dwindled to just a handful of people. Years of raider, slaver, and creature attacks drove most of the original settlers away, with some moving to safer places like Megaton. The town's name comes from the old Careful road sign close by, with the C and L knocked off. The settlement is designed to be defensible. The residents destroyed the northern span of the bridge, leaving only the southern entrance open, making it easier to guard against raiders. Arafu is a stop on the caravan trading circuit, which keeps some supplies flowing into town. Sandbags and makeshift defenses are set up at the gate, but manpower has always been its biggest problem. At one point, the town had around 30 residents, but by the time the Lone Wanderer arrives, only a few remain. Things got worse when Arafu became the target of attacks from the Family, a mysterious group tied to the Blood Ties quest. The West family was killed, Ian West disappeared, and the town's survival looked doubtful to say the least. Depending on how the Lone Wanderer resolves the situation, Arafu's population can recover slightly if Ian returns and Alan joins the settlement, also offering to trade blood packs with the family. While Arafu doesn't offer very much in the way of its services, Ken Ewers can repair gear after the Blood Ties quest, and Evan King acts as both the leader and protector of the community. For all its struggles, the town manages to hold on, clinging to life on a crumbling bridge in the middle of the wasteland.
Nuka World is one of the most unique cities in Fallout, because unlike places such as Diamond City or Megaton, its roots weren't in a traditional settlement at all. It was a pre-war amusement park. Opened on May 1st, 2050, after Nuka-Cola's meteoric success, the park was designed to be the ultimate family destination, with themed attractions like Nuka Town USA, Kitty Kingdom, Safari Adventure, Dry Rock Gulch, and eventually the Galactic Zone. At its peak, it drew tens of thousands of visitors and even had its own employee community, Bradburton, Massachusetts. But beneath the flashy rides and soda-fueled fun, the park was also a front for military research. John Caleb Bradburton, the mind behind Nuka-Cola, diverted funding from the park into Project Cobalt and the LEAP-X Life Extension Program, creating chemical weapons, experimental isotopes, and even Nuka-Cola Quantum. By 2077, the park's rides were falling apart. Accidents were frequent, and Bradburton had secretly turned himself into little more than a preserved head to cheat death. When the Great War came, Nuka World wasn't hit directly, but the chaos was devastating. Panic during evacuation left survivors trapped, many of whom eventually ghoulified in places like Kitty Kingdom. Other sections turned into death traps. Safari Adventure became home to cloned gator claws. The world of refreshment filled with Mirelurks warped into Nuka-Lurks, and Dry Rock Gulch was overrun with bloodworms. The Star mainframe and military-grade robotics kept parts of the park functioning long after humanity had abandoned it, leaving behind a bizarre, hostile playground of automated defenses and irradiated beasts. By 2287, Nuka World had been transformed into a raider fortress. Overboss Coulter and 3 raider gangs, the Disciples, the Operators, and the Pack, took over Nuka Town USA and enslaved the traders who had once tried to make the park a settlement. For us, this becomes one of the most influential decision points in Fallout 4's DLC. You can embrace the role of Overboss and lead the gangs in expanding their control, or you can dismantle their power and liberate the slaves. Either way, Nuka World is a place where wander, commerce, war, and survival all collide.
Broken Hills is a mining town in New California that became home to humans, ghouls, and super mutants living side by side. The settlement was founded after the Master's defeat, when the super mutant Marcus and a Brotherhood knight named Jacob gave up fighting each other and worked together to protect a group of refugees. They eventually settled at Broken Hills, where a rich uranium mine became the backbone of the town's economy. By 2241, Marcus was the town's leader, trying to keep peace in a community that was constantly under strain. The uranium mine was the town's lifeline. Super mutants did most of the labor since radiation didn't affect them much, and ghouls ran the refinery that processed the ore. The mine supplied uranium to places like Vault City and Gecko, and even Vault City was willing to trade with mutants if it meant keeping their power running. But the system was fragile. When the mine's air purifier broke down, the whole operation had to stop, leaving Broken Hills in an economic crisis. Tensions in town ran deeper than just money. A lot of the humans hated living with mutants, and a conspiracy formed to wipe them out. Jacob led the plot, sabotaging the mine's purifier, dumping bodies in caves to cause unrest, and even planning to collapse the mine on the super mutants. At the same time, some mutants like Francis created their own trouble, hoping to frame the anti-mutant group for killings. The Chosen One could step in to uncover these plots and decide the town's future. For a time after the conspiracy was stopped, Broken Hills thrived. But once the uranium was gone, the town couldn't sustain itself. Slowly people left, and what was once a rare place with coexistence turned into an abandoned ghost town in the wastes. Novac is a small settlement in the Mojave Wasteland, sitting along Highway 95 between the Repcon test site and New Vegas. Before the war, it was just a roadside stop, best known for its motel, the world's second largest thermometer, and the giant Dinky the T-Rex statue out front. After the bombs, the area was resettled and the town got its name from the motel's old sign, No Vacancy, with only the first 4 letters still lit up. By 2281, Novac had become an important stop for caravans, especially after the closure of Interstate 15 pushed more traffic onto Highway 95. That meant more trade, but also more trouble with raiders, Legion scouts, and feral ghouls in the area. To keep the town safe, 2 veteran NCR 1st Recon snipers, Craig Boone and Manny Vargas, took shifts guarding from the mouth of the Dinky the T-Rex, picking off threats before they could reach the town. Ranger Andy, a retired NCR Ranger, also settled in Novac, offering what help he could despite being injured. Economically, Novac relies on salvage from the Repcon test site that's close by, as well as steady caravan trade. Merchants like Cliff Briscoe run the Dino Bite gift shop, while Dr. Ada Strauss provides medical services. Jeannie Mae Crawford, the motel's manager, oversees day-to-day affairs and rents rooms to travelers, including the courier. Other residents include locals like Nobark Noonan and the McBride family, whose Brahmin troubles sometimes spill into the town's business. The town itself is small, with the Dino Delight Motel at its center. Then you have a handful of houses and the gas station across the road that doubles as a trading spot. It may not look like a lot, but Novac's location makes it a key stop for anyone traveling to the Mojave, whether they're merchants, wanderers, or soldiers just passing through.
Diamond City is one of the most iconic locations in the Fallout universe, and what makes it stand out is that it was born from a piece of pre-war culture rather than a traditional town. Originally, Fenway Park was Boston's baseball stadium, home of the Swatting Sultans and the stage for the long-awaited 2077 World Series. On the very day the bombs fell, fans were preparing to gather for the 7th and final game of the series, one that might have finally ended Boston's World Series drought. Instead, the morning of October 23rd brought the Great War, and the stadium that had been built for America's pastime became a fortress against nuclear devastation. In the years that followed, survivors took advantage of Fenway's thick walls and central location. By 2130, the settlement of Diamond City was founded, eventually earning the nickname the Great Green Jewel, thanks to the iconic left field wall, the Green Monster, turned into part of its fortifications. Over time, Diamond City developed its own government, economy, and even a police force. It became the Commonwealth's most powerful city, offering education, agriculture, and a bustling marketplace. Yet, its history wasn't without conflict. Events like the Broken Mask incident, where a synth killed innocent civilians, fueled paranoia about the Institute and deepened mistrust within the city. Social divides also emerged, with wealthier citizens occupying the upper stands while the working class lived on the lower fields. And moments of outright cruelty, such as the anti-ghoul movement, stained the city's legacy. By 2287, Diamond City is a hub of life and survival in the Commonwealth, but also a microcosm of its problems: paranoia, inequality, and political corruption. Now, we can influence the city in a number of ways: through quests tied to Piper Wright and her fight against corruption, by investigating synth activity alongside Nick Valentine, or simply by shaping Diamond City's daily life through trade, alliances, and dialogue. For all its flaws, Diamond City isn't so bad, as it reflects the best parts of human resilience, transforming a stadium once dedicated to sport into the beating heart of post-war Boston.
Modoc is a small farming town in the mountains of New California. It's best known for its Brahmin herds, leather, and meat. But by 2241, the town was struggling, since other places could produce the same goods cheaper. What kept Modoc relevant was its spot along the Vault City trade routes, turning it into a stopover point for travelers. Life there was simple, but the town had its fair share of problems. Rumors of ghosts, missing valuables, rat infestations, and even a missing child kept the place from being too safe. The town itself is centered around Main Street, where Joe, who is both the sheriff and mayor, runs the trading post. You can also find Balthus Tannery, Grisham's family home and slaughterhouse, and the town well. Close by is Farrell's Garden, constantly plagued by rats. And then you have the Brahmin pastures where herders sometimes needed help fighting off wild dogs. Modoc is also one of the few places in the Wastes where you can actually get married, thanks to the Grisham family. One of the town's weirdest locations is Rose's Bed and Breakfast. Normally it's a regular inn, but the chicken coop out back actually held a Deathclaw, where Rose collected eggs for her famous omelets. That ended when the Chosen One blew the rocks blocking the entrance and killed the mother Deathclaw. The outhouse outside also hid a cavern filled with methane and goo, leading to one of the strangest quests in the area. Over time, Modoc managed to survive its ups and downs. By 2281, the Crimson Caravan had even opened a branch in the town, showing that while it never grew into a major city, Modoc still found a way to stay on the map. Rivet City is one of the largest settlements in the Capital Wasteland, built inside the remains of a massive pre-war aircraft carrier resting on the Potomac River. By 2277, it had grown into a bustling community with a working market, clinic, hotel, hydroponic farms, and even a full science lab. Its security force kept raiders, mutants, and mirelurks at bay, making it one of the safest places in the region. Rivet City also produced clean, non-irradiated food, which it traded with other towns for supplies. The aircraft carrier was abandoned after the Great War, until remnants of the Naval Research Institute led by Horace Pinkerton claimed it in the late 2230s. They cleared out the mirelurks and turned the science bay into their headquarters. Over time, civilians moved in, and by 2239, Rivet City was officially founded. It was governed by a 3-person council representing the scientists, civilians, and the security forces. Pinkerton remained a leading figure until 2258, when Madison Lee and her team arrived from Project Purity. They took over the science division. Frustrated at the situation, Pinkerton left to live in the broken bow of the ship, where he continued his work in isolation. Life in Rivet City is far from perfect. Constant maintenance was needed to keep the ship habitable, and a lot of the residents suffered health issues from rust and age. A class divide also existed, with people on the hangar deck living rougher lives compared to the upper deck citizens. After the Brotherhood of Steel activated Project Purity, Rivet City became one of their main trading partners, supplying protection for water caravans in exchange for weapons and tech. But the constant raider attacks strained Rivet City's defenses, and losses mounted as more caravans were destroyed. Even so, Rivet City remained a key stronghold in the wasteland.
Covenant, one of the more unsettling settlements in the Commonwealth, appears at first glance to be a pristine, almost too perfect town with pre-war architecture and welcoming residents. But beneath its charm lies a dark purpose. Founded after the Broken Mask incident, Covenant became the base for Dr. Rosalind Chambers and her team, who turned the settlement into the front for their underground facility known as the Compound. There, they developed the Safe Test, a psychological exam designed to identify synth infiltrators, but its application meant visitors were often kidnapped, interrogated, tortured, and killed in the name of proving its accuracy. The residents of Covenant supported this anti-synth crusade, even profiting from the looted belongings of victims, though the settlement still operated at a deficit. For us, Covenant's fate is directly shaped by our choices. We can either side with Chambers and the Compound, endorsing their brutal methods, or expose the truth and liberate the town, ensuring Covenant either thrives as a genuine settlement or collapses under the weight of its lies. Shady Sands is one of the most important settlements in Fallout's history, not because it existed before the bombs, but because it was created entirely as a result of them. Founded in 2141 to 2142 by survivors from Vault 15, the town began as a modest farming community in California's wastelands. Using their GECK, the people of Shady Sands managed to irrigate desert soil, raise Brahmin, and build adobe homes, while fending off raider groups like the Khans, Vipers, and Jackals, who were also descendants of Vault 15. By the time the Vault Dweller visited in Fallout 1, Shady Sands had already become a small but thriving settlement, defined by cooperation, agriculture, and resilience under its leader Aradesh and his daughter Tandy. From those humble beginnings, Shady Sands grew into the capital of the NCR, the closest thing Fallout has to a modern nation. In 2189, Shady Sands hosted the first council that formally established the NCR, with Aradesh as its first president and later Tandy taking the mantle. Over the next century, Shady Sands transformed into a bustling city, boasting schools, courts, markets, parks, and a population that reached nearly 35,000 people by 2283. It stood as the political and cultural center of the NCR, with its Hall of Congress, presidential offices, and influence shaping the entire Western Wasteland. Its role in organizing, defending, and expanding the NCR helped stabilize much of post-war California and beyond, making Shady Sands a symbol of civilization's rebirth. Unfortunately, its story ended in tragedy. Around 2283, Shady Sands was destroyed by a nuclear strike in what became known as the Fall of Shady Sands. The bomb was launched under the orders from Hank, a Vault-Tec executive, effectively decapitating the NCR's leadership and leaving its institutions in shambles. Survivors fled to nearby settlements, vaults, and even the Brotherhood of Steel, but the destruction of Shady Sands shifted the balance of power in the West. For players, the influence over Shady Sands comes less in direct control of the city itself and more in shaping its legacy, whether through the NCR in Fallout 2 and New Vegas or through Fallout TV series that revisits its fate. Shady Sands represents the best and worst of post-war civilization, a hopeful beginning, a powerful empire, and ultimately a reminder of how fragile even the strongest communities can be in the wasteland.
Tenpenny Tower is one of the most unique settlements in the Capital Wasteland, sitting west of the DC ruins. Before the bombs, it was a luxury resort for the wealthy, and by 2277, it had been rebuilt into a private fortress owned by Alistair Tenpenny, a rich, weird guy from England. He only allowed in those who could pay or fit his idea of proper residence, which meant no ghouls were welcome. Inside, the tower was restored with shops, a bar, a clinic, and lavish penthouse suites overlooking the wasteland. Tenpenny himself treated the tower like his personal playground, even going so far as to snipe at creatures or wanderers outside for sport, calling it a wasteland safari. He relied on Gustavo to run security and Mr. Burke as his right-hand man, who was also involved in Tenpenny's plans to remove Megaton as an eyesore on the horizon. Life inside the tower was comfortable with clean water, reliable power siphoned from the metro system, and plenty of protection from the chaos outside. The exterior of the building was heavily fortified after the war, with tall concrete walls and guard stations set up around the perimeter. Damage from the bombs had been patched up with scrap metal, but it was still one of the most secure structures in the region. Entry wasn't free. Outsiders usually had to pay a bribe to get past the front gate, unless they found another way inside. The lobby and upper levels are a mix of business and apartments. Places like Café Beaumont, Gustavo's Armory, and the Federalista Lounge was both for residents and travelers who had caps to spend. The penthouse suites were reserved for the wealthy elite, with the lone wanderer able to acquire their own room right next to Tenpenny's. And this is all well and dandy unless the lone wanderer decides to let the ghouls in. In that scenario, the ghouls kill all of the residents and take over the town for themselves. Hopefully that's not the scenario we ended up with, in my opinion. Not that Tenpenny doesn't deserve it, but for the rest of the people, you know. Arroyo began as a small tribal village founded by the Vault Dweller after his exile from Vault 13 in 2161. A handful of Vault residents followed him, and together they built a settlement that lasted for generations. By 2242, the Enclave raided the village, capturing its people and bringing them to the oil rig for FEV experiments. There, the Arroyo villagers were reunited with surviving members of Vault 13, who had also been taken as test subjects. After the Chosen One destroyed the Enclave, both groups were stranded with the Gek. They decided to start fresh, blending the resourcefulness of Arroyo's tribals with the technical knowledge of the Vault Dwellers. The new settlement carried the same name, Arroyo, and it quickly grew into a stronger and more advanced community than the original village. The Chosen One himself went on to serve as the city's elder. Over time, Arroyo expanded into a major city and eventually became part of the new California Republic. By 2281, it was still known as an important NCR settlement, with ties reaching as far as the followers of the Apocalypse, through people like Dr. Emily Ortle, whose family lived there. Also, that's the last current info we have on it. With the NCR kind of collapsing based on the show, who knows what Arroyo looks like now. Just keep that in mind for most of these West Coast settlements. The Den is a rough settlement in Northern California that thrived on drugs, slavery, and crime during the 2240s. With no central authority or law enforcement, it was the kind of place where survival came down to who was the strongest or smartest. Slavers, raiders, and shady merchants made up a lot of its economy, and the Slavers Guild ran openly on the east side of town. The town itself was split into two main areas. The west side had most of the shops and places travelers visited, like Becky's Casino Bar and Smitty's Junkyard, where a working car could be found if you had the right parts. The east side held the darker side of the Den though. The Slavers Guild headquarters, Mom's Diner, a graveyard, and the Hole Bar. The Den's history also carried some scars from the Master's defeat in 2162. Refugees, super mutants, and members of the Children of Cathedral fled north after his fall, with some cultists even committing suicide in the town. By 2241, that legacy mixed with the drug and slave trade gave the Den a reputation as one of the most dangerous places in the region. By 2281, the Den had changed. Raiders and slavers were pretty much gone, replaced by laws, taxes, and a more stable economy. Farming and manufacturing became its focus, shifting the town away from its lawless roots into something closer to a functioning settlement. It was no longer the wild frontier town it once was, but I'm guessing a lot of Wastelanders won't forget the old Den anytime soon.
We are the children of Adam, servants of the creator of this and all worlds. You walk through his domain.
What do you mean, his domain?
The island. You've seen the fog, heard the Geiger counter on your little bracelet pipe up? That is Adam, spreading his glow across this land, and that glow is the path to our salvation.
The Nucleus, once the Mount Desert Island Naval Facility in Maine, was a US Navy submarine base that housed the USS Democracy before the bombs fell. In 2077, its reactor was sabotaged by Captain Arnold, forcing a hazmat team to work around the clock to contain radiation, but the Great War struck before repairs could be finished. The base survived the blast, though radiation from the submarine made the site uninhabitable for years. It wasn't until 2178 that Dima discovered the facility, storing some of his oldest memories there before turning it over to the Children of Adam, who consequently had been exiled from Far Harbor. Renaming it the Nucleus, the cult transformed the base into their holy sanctuary, worshipping the leaking submarine and its nuclear arsenal as instruments of their prophesized Great Division. By 2287, the site is one of the most dangerous and influential locations on the island, where the sole survivor can either ally with the children, sabotage them, or even unlock the submarine's warheads, decisions that unquestionably shape the fate of the island itself.
So we were on our own, all of us starving, near to death. No man should have to watch his wife and children suffer. You know what I mean?
Warwick Homestead, located in the Commonwealth, was once the Nut Island wastewater treatment plant before the bombs fell, a pre-war facility that kept Boston's water clean. After the war, the Warwick family transformed the ruined plant into a functioning farmstead, turning the old infrastructure into fertile farmland and eventually forming ties with the Adam Cats. By the late 23rd century, the settlement became more than just a family farm when the Institute replaced Roger Warwick with a synth double to secretly experiment on advanced crop growth. They effectively used the homestead as a testing ground for their agricultural projects. While Bill Sutton grew suspicious of Roger's true nature in 2287, the farm itself continued to serve as an important food source in the region. For us as a sole survivor, Warwick Homestead can be secured as a thriving Allied settlement, shaping its future as either a cornerstone of the Commonwealth's survival or a silent extension of the Institute's hidden agenda. This one barely made the cut, but I thought it would be worthwhile to mention.
Klamath is a small town in southern Oregon, built on the ruins of Klamath Falls. By 2241, it had grown into a hub for trappers who made their living hunting geckos, especially the valuable golden ones. Their pelts kept the town's economy running, and caravans usually stopped in on their way north to villages like Arroyo. The place was simple but busy, full of hunters, merchants, and wanderers passing through. But that didn't mean that Klamath didn't have its issues, like pretty much any of the towns in Fallout. Rats had overrun parts of the town, the trappers were always dealing with dangerous wildlife, and locals told strange stories about a damaged Mr. Handy robot that they thought was some kind of spirit. There was also a crashed Enclave vertibird that could be found in the nearby canyon. Around the same time, Vic the Trader, who was one of Klamath's better-known residents, was captured by Metzger's slavers, tying the town directly into the larger conflicts of the region. The town was split into two different districts. Downtown had the inns, pubs, and shops, while Trapper Town housed most of the gecko hunters, and it led down into the rat caves. The surrounding areas include Klamath Canyon, the trapping grounds where Whiskey Bob brewed moonshine, the grazing fields where Tors Brahmin roamed, and of course the Toxic Caves, a radioactive stretch filled with geckos where Smiley the Trapper was once rescued. Even decades later, Klamath stayed basically the same. According to Klamath Bob, people were still out there hunting, skinning, and eating geckos, just like they had for generations. It never became a big city, but it remained a steady outpost in the north, known best for its trappers and constant dangers they faced in the wild. Jacobstown is a quiet settlement in the mountains northwest of New Vegas. Before the war, it was just a ski resort on Mount Charleston, but by the 2260s, it became something more. After the failure of his first mutant refuge at Black Mountain, Marcus, who was the same super mutant who once led Broken Hills that we talked about earlier, founded Jacobstown as a new safe haven. He named it after his old friend Jacob, a Brotherhood knight who helped him back in the day. Marcus's goal was simple: give super mutants and Nightkin a place to live in peace, while keeping the door open to humans and ghouls who would accept them. The community largely sustained itself by raising bighorners, trading meat and hides with passing caravans for whatever else they need. The old resort lodge serves as the hub of the town, with a few bungalows close for the residents. Marcus leads the settlement, but not without its challenges. A lot of the Nightkin, led by Keen, are restless and frustrated about their schizophrenia caused by the years of Stealth Boy use. To address this, Dr. Henry, a former Enclave scientist, set up a lab in Jacobstown to research a cure, but progress has been slow and the tensions are rising. Jacobstown also has problems with outsiders. NCR officials blame the mutants for attacks on Brahmin herds, even without proof, and they've sent mercenaries to harass or drive them out. This constant suspicion makes trade difficult, but Marcus remains determined to prove that mutants can live peacefully alongside humans. Other factions like the Great Khans and Caesar's Legion seem to ignore Jacobstown for the most part. But the state of Utobitha, Tabitha's old mutant cult at Black Mountain, is openly hostile. Regardless of the struggles, Jacobstown is one of the few places in the Mojave where mutants, Nightkins, ghouls, and even humans can coexist without constant fighting. Visitors who respect the rules are welcome, but it's clear the settlement's survival depends on whether Marcus's vision of peace can hold against both internal division and outside pressure. I hope that we get to see this place in Fallout Season 2. We need to see some super mutants in the show, and this place would be a perfect way to show the less hostile and more intelligent versions. Westside is one of the rougher districts of New Vegas, sitting just outside of the Strip's walls. It looks run down, but the community here has worked hard to make it self-sufficient. With help from the followers of the apocalypse, settlers figured out how to grow crops, raise food, and keep the place defended. That effort turned Westside into more than just a bunch of ruins. It became a working neighborhood with its own economy and its own rules. The people run things through the Westside Cooperative, a group that handles farming and trade. Profits from the surplus crops are shared among members, and that system has allowed the town to survive without being tied down by the NCR or Mr. House. But water has always been a problem. The NCR controls most of the supply and sells it at high prices, so Tom Anderson, one of the followers, secretly tapped into an NCR pump to keep Westside alive. That decision worked out for the town, but it also put them in direct conflict with NCR interests, even leading to violence when Anderson tried to cover up his secret. For defense, Westside relies on its own militia. They're not a professional army, but they're enough to hold off raiders, fiends, or even smaller gangs like the Scorpions. A handful of strong personalities like Klamath Bob and the super mutant known as Mean Son of a Bitch help keep things in check. Thanks to them, fiends generally stay clear of the area, sticking close to Vault 3 or Camp McCarran. Travelers coming through usually find Westside safer than it looks, but the people are cautious with outsiders. Day-to-day life here is average. You have a pawn shop, a liquor store, a brothel, and some crop fields that keep the community running. Just outside the gates lies the Thorn, a bloody underground fighting pit that draws plenty of attention from the Mojave. Westside might not shine like the Strip, but it's one of the few places in New Vegas where people built something that feels like a real community, independent, stubborn, and determined to survive. It seems like a good and honest place to settle down.
Foundation is a fun location to explore in Fallout 76, and unlike many of Appalachia's towns, it didn't exist before the bombs. Built in 2103, Foundation rose from the ruins of the Spruce Knob Workshop, a former pre-war tourist site. When a group of survivors from Pittsburgh, led by Paige, came searching for a better life than the one they had under the city's horrors, they found Spruce Knob and repurposed the land into a new settlement. What had once been a quiet observation point became the headquarters of the settlers, a community dedicated to building a sustainable home in Appalachia. Unlike cities tied directly to the Great War's industries, Foundation owes its existence entirely to the post-war world and the determination of those who wanted to carve out something better. The settlement quickly grew into a fortress of survival. Its log-built homes, sawmill, and central fusion generator provided the infrastructure needed to support settlers, and its leaders, Paige and Ward, focused on stability and trade. Foundation became both a haven for refugees and a target for its rivals, especially the raiders holed up at Crater. While the raiders embraced chaos and violence, the settlers of Foundation chose order and rebuilding, creating a tense ideological clash across Appalachia. Foundation doesn't represent what was lost in the Great War, but instead what might be gained, if people are willing to work together even in the shadow of destruction. For us, Foundation's story is as much about choice as it is about history. As you engage with its residents and their leaders, you influence whether the settlement thrives or falters, and how it stacks up against its raider rivals. Do you align with Paige's vision of a future built on cooperation and honest labor, or side with Crater's rougher philosophy? That decision carries weight across Appalachia, affecting quests, alliances, and even the balance of power in the region. Foundation may be a young settlement compared to others in Fallout lore, but it stands to show that new communities can rise from the ashes. The crater is one of the more unique cities in Fallout. Its origins began after the bombs fell. Before the Great War, this area of Appalachia was nothing more than a quiet patch of the Toxic Valley, until the Valiant 1 space station came crashing down from orbit. The impact carved out the massive crater that would eventually give the site its name. No thriving pre-war community existed here, no industries tied to the war effort, just a piece of high-tech wreckage buried in Appalachian soil, showing what was lost when the skies burned. It wasn't until 2103, decades after the Great War, that the site became something more. The Diehards, one of Appalachia's original raider factions, returned to the region under Meg and found the wrecked station a perfect base. Caleb Fisher and other Die-Hard survivors built the crater out of the ruins, surrounding the space station's skeleton with scaffolding, fields, and raider architecture. What emerged was the largest raider settlement in Appalachia, a community that was as brutal as it was resourceful, feeding itself with crop fields and keeping itself entertained in the ways only raiders can. Post-war, the crater stands as the antithesis of Foundation. While Foundation represents rebuilding and cooperation, the crater thrives on raiding, intimidation, and survival through strength. It serves as the raiders' headquarters and the staging ground for their biggest ventures, including the daring heist on Vault 79. As the player, we're given a rare chance to influence its future. Through the Wastelanders storyline, your choices can strengthen the crater and Meg's leadership, or you can push Appalachia toward the settlers instead. That decision doesn't just change quest rewards, it defines which vision of society gets a foothold in Appalachia, one built on rebuilding or one built on raw survival. In the end, the crater is less about what it was before the bombs and more about what humanity did with the wreckage afterward. A space station that once symbolized ambition and progress became the foundation of Appalachia's largest raider stronghold. And whether you choose to back them or undermine them, the crater is proof that even in the wasteland, people will always find a way to turn ruins into power.
Ah, the classic. Megaton is one of the most well-known settlements in the capital wasteland, built inside a massive crater with an undetonated atomic bomb sitting right at the center. The town's walls were made from scavenged airplane parts, giving it strong defenses against raiders and dust storms. Over time, Megaton became a busy stop for merchant caravans and one of the largest towns in the region, second only to Rivet City. Even with its size, it never had an official government. Leadership usually fell to Lucas Sims, the self-appointed sheriff, and Colin Moriarty, the saloon owner who had his hand in nearly everything. The Children of Adam also made their home in Megaton, gathering around the bomb and preaching about its divine power. Most of the settlers considered them strange but harmless. Sims was obviously worried about the danger of keeping a live warhead in the middle of town. For day-to-day life, Megaton had shops like Craterside Supply run by Moira Brown. Then you had the Brass Lantern Diner, Doc Church's Clinic, and Moriarty Saloon. Space was limited, so some settlers lived in the common house, while others had small personal shacks built along the crater's walls. By 2277, Megaton had already seen its share of trouble. Raiders from nearby Springvale tried to attack, only to be put down by Lucas Sims himself. The Lone Wanderer later arrived while searching for their father and quickly became involved in the settlement's affairs, helping Moira with her Wasteland Survival Guide, and possibly deciding the fate of the bomb at the town's core. We don't know the canon outcome of that one. Whether Megaton survived or was reduced to a radioactive ruin depended entirely on that choice. If the town endured, it prospered after Project Purity was restored, with caravans carrying Moira's Wasteland Survival Guide across the wastes. If destroyed, the crater became nothing but scorched rubble and deadly radiation, remembered only by that one creepy line of Deputy Weld still repeating his welcome greeting. Little Lamplight is one of the stranger settlements in the capital wasteland. It sits inside Lamplight Caverns, which were once a tourist attraction long before the war. In 2077, a group of elementary school kids were visiting on a field trip when the bombs fell. Trapped underground, the adults either died or left over time, leaving the children to survive on their own. From then on, the settlement became a place run entirely by kids, with anyone over 16 forced to leave for Big Town, and we'll get to that one in a bit. The community developed its own rules and leadership, starting with Jason Grant as the first mayor. By 2274, Robert McCready had taken over, keeping order with the interesting vocabulary, I guess we could say.
Don't take another step or we'll blow your fucking head off.
The kids handled everything themselves, trading with scavengers for supplies, teaching other basic schooling through old holotapes. and even running shops like Knick-Knack's store and Eclair's food stand. Doctors, guards, and even politicians were all children. The settlement itself is spread through winding caves. The main area near the gate holds the office clinic and school, while the Spelunker's restaurant and souvenir shop are tucked deeper in. The heart of the settlement is the Great Chamber, a massive cavern filled with walkways and hanging rooms where the kids live. Adjacent tunnels connect to Vault 87 and Murder Pass, but those routes are dangerous and usually avoided. By 2277, Little Lamplight was still thriving, even though we basically had Lord of the Flies going on. The kids remained wary of Mungos, which is what they call adults, letting them in only when absolutely necessary. What became of the settlement later isn't clear, but MacCready was eventually kicked out and made his way to the Commonwealth, leaving the fate of the children behind. Freeside sits just outside the Strip and is one of the roughest parts of New Vegas. It grew out of the old ruins along Fremont Street, left behind when Mr. House walled off the Strip and focused all his energy there. The area quickly became a dumping ground for the people who weren't considered worthy of the Strip, but it didn't stay completely lawless. Over time, two groups rose to keep some order: the Kings, who act as the local gang turned protectors, and the followers of the Apocalypse, who run the old Mormon fort and provide food, medical care, and some education to the community. Still, Freeside is dangerous, with crime, poverty, and constant tension between locals and NCR squatters who have drifted in. Regardless of the chaos, Freeside is packed with places that make it a hotspot of Mojave life. The north side holds Mick and Ralph's pawn shop, the old Mormon fort, and rundown buildings like Cerulean Robotics. The south side is busier, home to the King's School of Impersonation, the Atomic Wrangler Casino, and the Silver Rush, where the Van Graffs run their energy weapons trade. These businesses, along with a handful of smaller shops and services, keep the district running, even if most of the profits flow through gangs or shady deals. The people here live on edge, but they get by however they can. Some hire bodyguards just to walk the streets, while kids will scavenge or hustle visitors for caps. The Kings keep major violence under control, but they don't police day-to-day crime, leaving a lot of residents vulnerable. Meanwhile, the followers stretch themselves thin, constantly short on supplies and relying on goodwill to keep the district from collapsing further. Freeside is an overcrowded, dangerous district that survives on scraps. For outsiders, it's both a gateway to the Strip and a place where fortunes can change quickly, depending on who you deal with and how well you can handle yourself. Or it will be the last stop you'll make on your journey to the Strip.
Alright, here's the deal. Junktown, it ain't what it used to be.
Junktown is one of the earliest post-war communities we encounter in Fallout, and unlike many wasteland settlements, it wasn't built atop pre-war ruins, but rather from scratch. Founded by a former US soldier using whatever scrap he could find, Junktown grew into a modest but important trading hub in Southern California. Its ramshackle walls of rusted cars and junk defined its look, but it also gained a reputation for hospitality, so long as visitors respected the rules, like no weapons drawn inside town. By 2161, leadership fell to Killian Darkwater, who represented law and order, though his authority was constantly challenged by Gizmo, a corrupt casino owner who saw vice and profit as the town's future. The Vault Dwellers' choices in Fallout 1 play a major role in shaping Junktown's fate. Supporting Killian brings stability and growth, while siding with Gizmo plunges it into crime and corruption. Regardless, Junktown's legacy endures. Within decades, it joined Shady Sands in helping form the NCR, becoming a founding member of the Republic's provisional state of Shady. By the late 23rd century, it was remembered as both a thriving farming community and the inspiration for the iconic Tales of a Junktown Jerky Vendor, a comic turned manual found as far away as the East Coast. The hub was founded in 2093 by Angus around an old town largely spared from the bombs and quickly grew into the largest post-war trading center in New California. Built on caravans, farms, and its vital water tower, the hub became an economic powerhouse, but was plagued by gang violence, merchant rivalries, and corruption, eventually stabilizing under the Hub Trading Company after the Bloody Merchant Wars. By the late 22nd century, it supplied food, water, and trade across the region, fostering ties with the Brotherhood of Steel and later joining the new California Republic in 2189 as one of its founding states. Its influence only grew, with the Crimson Caravan and other houses shaping NCR trade, and even reintroducing bottle caps as currency when faith in NCR dollars collapsed. For us, the hub represents both the promise and the pitfalls of wasteland commerce, where you can navigate its factions and see firsthand how survival and profit built the backbone of the NCR. Big Town is a settlement in the capital Wasteland made up almost entirely of kids who grow up in Little Lamplight.
Once they hit 16, they were forced to leave and told that Big Town would be a safe place for Mungos to live. The reality was not so great. By the time of Fallout 3, the town was falling apart, constantly raided by super mutants and slavers. The residents were few in number, scared, and basically had little hope of defending themselves. When the Lone Wanderer shows up, they learn that some of the townsfolk had already been taken by mutants to the Germantown police station. They can rescue them and even teach the settlers how to fight back. Without help, most of Big Town's citizens are cynical of their fate, expecting to die or be captured at any moment. People like Bittercup make it clear just how hopeless the settlement feels. Structurally, the town is small, built from the remains of old suburban houses reinforced with scrap walls, cars, barbed wire, and even sandbags. It's surrounded by barricades with only one bridge leading inside. The buildings that remain are a clinic, a town hall, and communal living spaces. Red X is both the doctor and de facto leader, while others like Pappy try to keep what's left of the town running. If the Lone Wanderer helps defend Big Town and trains the residents, the settlement can finally stand on its own. The attacks stop and the place becomes a safer stop in the wasteland. If not, Big Town remains vulnerable and its long-term survival is left uncertain. Sloan is a small NCR-run mining camp along I-15, just south of Quarry Junction. The place exists mainly to support the limestone quarry, where stone is dug out, shipped to Boulder City, and then turned into cement for NCR bunkers and defenses. It's hard, dirty work, but it kept the camp alive, at least until things went bad. First, the Powder Gangers stole their dynamite, which meant mining stopped completely, and then Deathclaws moved into the quarry, making it too dangerous for anyone to go back. By 2281, Sloan is basically stuck in limbo, with workers just waiting for someone tough enough to clear the beasts out. The camp's morale isn't great, but they do have one odd source of comfort, a tame mole rat named Snuffles. It wandered into Sloan with an injured leg and ended up becoming the workers' unofficial pet. With nothing else going on, Snuffles is pretty much the highlight of their day-to-day lives. The settlement itself is tiny, made up of just a handful of buildings. There's a barracks for the workers, which holds a couple of useful skill books, and a mining office with some loot and a busted generator out back. Fixing that generator actually completes a small unmarked quest though. Sloan also has a machine shop where you can scavenge crafting supplies and a mess hall where another minor quest begins. Without dynamite or soldiers to take back Quarry Junction, the entire operation is at a standstill. Whether that changes or not is up to the courier. I wonder if Sloan kept on growing or just eventually fizzled out. Gecko is a ghoul settlement northeast of Vault City, built around an old Poseidon Energy nuclear power plant. The plant had survived the Great War intact, sitting dormant until a group of ghouls reactivated it in the 2230s. The plant became the center of their economy, but it was badly maintained and eventually began leaking radioactive waste into the groundwater. This caused major tensions with Vault City, as we know, whose citizens believed the ghouls were deliberately poisoning them. By 2238, Harold had arrived in Gecko and quickly became the town's leader. He tried to help stabilize the plant and manage the growing community, while also dealing with Vault City's hostility. The ghouls kept trade alive with Broken Hills, importing uranium ore to power their reactor, but they were pretty cautious to keep that trade hidden from Vault City. Gecko even developed its own unique drinks like Gamma Gold beer and Roten Gin rum, which made their way into New Reno bars. When the Chosen One arrived, they uncovered the plant's problems and worked with Harold and Festus to repair it, ignoring Vault City's demand to shut it down. With the right parts and data, the plant not only stabilized, but it began producing more power than it ever had before. This opened the door for cooperation between Gecko and Vault City, helped along by Counselor McClure, one of the few Vault City officials that didn't hate ghouls just because. The deal allowed Vault City to expand its energy supply, while Gecko received medicine and resources, creating the first real peace between the two towns. Harold eventually left Gecko after the plant was running smoothly, heading east to continue wandering. The town's later fate isn't fully known, but it's likely Gecko was eventually absorbed into the Republic. At least that would be my guess. But for a time, it stood as one of the few places in the Wastes where ghouls ran their own community and held their ground against human hostility.
The Necropolis was mine. Not in all things great, but a straight place for my kind. Then the Master showed. He could have fragged me good. But it was easy for him to just stand some muties and keep an eye on.
Necropolis, also called the City of the Dead, rose out of the irradiated ruins of Bakersfield, California after the Great War, when Vault 12's experiment left its blast doors deliberately unsealed, flooding the residents with radiation and transforming them into some of the wasteland's earliest ghouls. By 2083, these survivors founded Necropolis, with the volatile ghoul Set eventually taking control, though true power often shifted between him and the Unity's super mutants who use the city to secure its water supply. Necropolis was infamous for its hostility towards outsiders, surviving on rationed water and brutal rule, but it also became one of the few ghoul-dominated settlements in Fallout history. In 2162, the Vault Dweller's quest for a water chip brought him to Necropolis, where he could aid the ghouls by repairing their water pump or leave them to die of thirst. Soon after, the Unity retaliated for the Dweller's actions with a devastating purge, scattering survivors across the wastes and leading to the founding of other settlements like Gecko and Broken Hills. Sure, it isn't an all-out city, but the Slog is one of the most unique settlements in the Commonwealth, built on the remains of the old Middlesex County swimming pool, and today it stands out as the only Tarberry farm in the region. Unlike most communities, it was created after the war specifically as a refuge for ghouls, many of whom were exiled from Diamond City by the mayor's anti-ghoul policies. Under the leadership of Wiseman, the Slog has become a symbol of what outcasts can accomplish when they work together, transforming a ruined pool into a productive agricultural hub that trades its tarberries across the Commonwealth. While it faces constant danger from nearby threats like the Forged and even the occasional Deathclaw, the settlement survives through cooperation and determination. For the sole survivor, the Slog can be recruited into the Minutemen's network of settlements, reinforcing Wiseman's vision that ghouls can be seen as more than monsters, proving that perseverance, even in a wasteland, can turn a slog into something worthwhile.
Canterbury Commons is a small trading hub on the eastern side of the Capital Wasteland. It was founded in 2258 by Ernest Uncle Rowe and his sister Daisy as a safe headquarters for merchant caravans. Over the years, it grew into the endpoint of the Wasteland's caravan routes, and by 2277, it hosted some of the best-known traders around. Crazy Wolfgang, Crow, Doc Hoff, and Lucky Harith all operated out of the town. Even with raider attacks that claimed Daisy's life, Uncle Rowe kept the place running and remained its leader. In the same year, the settlement had gained a strange reputation because of the ongoing feud between two costume figures, the Antagonizer and the Mechanist. The Antagonizer blamed Canterbury for her parents' death and saw it as a symbol of what she wanted to destroy. Her attacks with giant ants pushed Scott Walensky, the town's mechanic, into creating his own alter ego, the Mechanist, complete with a robot army to defend the town. Their constant battles turned Canterbury Commons into their weird comic book battleground. The settlement itself is built from the remains of a pre-war town. Only a few buildings are actually in use. Joe Porter runs his cafe out of an old diner, Dominic and Machete live in a converted garage, and Uncle Rowe makes his home in the fire station with his nephew Derek. Then we have a Brahmin pen that sits behind the garage, and the wide cul-de-sac in front of the town that serves as a gathering point for visiting caravans. While Canterbury Commons isn't a large settlement, its role as a central trading hub gives it influence far beyond its size. For merchants, it's the place to stop, resupply, and keep business moving across the wasteland. For everyone else, it's remembered as the town caught in the middle of one of the weirdest rivalries in the Capital Wasteland. Underworld is a hidden ghoul settlement found inside the Museum of History in downtown DC. In 2277, it had become a refuge for non-feral ghouls who were tired of being harassed or outright attacked by humans. Founded around 2230, the community built itself up with the basics: a bar, inn, clinic, general store, and even a barber. Dr. Barrows acts as both physician and the closest thing they have to a mayor, but his medical work takes priority. Outsiders aren't always trusted, but as long as visitors behave, they'll be welcomed. Life in the underworld is quiet compared to the chaos outside. Ghouls spend their time at Carol's Place or at the Ninth Circle Bar, while traders like Tulip and Quinn help keep supplies moving in. Patrols are sometimes sent into the neighboring ruins, but it is risky, and not everyone comes back. The settlement's location deep in the ruins keeps raiders and slavers away, and even the super mutants usually leave them alone. For extra protection, Cerberus, the security bot, and Sharon, a heavily armed ghoul bodyguard, make sure trouble doesn't last long. The name Underworld comes from the museum exhibit that once occupied the space before the bombs. Signs from the old display on death and the afterlife still hang in the entryway, so that's where they took their name. The community is determined to survive on its own terms, apart from the human-dominated world that rejected them. Tulip's shop and Winthrop's repair office sit near the entrance, with Barrow's clinic further inside. Upstairs, you have the Ninth Circle that offers drinks and chems, while Carol's Place provides food and lodging. Even Snowflake, the settlement's barber, is hopeful for the chance to work on a full head of hair. I always loved the underworld back as a kid.
Atlantic City was the big showpiece in '76, but Pleasant Valley Cabins are a perfect example of Fallout's smaller, more intimate locations that still tell a very human story. Before the Great War, this wasn't some rugged raider hideout, it was pure luxury. The centerpiece was the Black Diamond Lodge, a grand mountain resort where the wealthy and powerful came to ski, relax, and flaunt their success. The surrounding cabins catered to affluent visitors, filled with comforts far beyond what the average Appalachian miner or farmer could dream of. It was a bubble of privilege in a region already torn apart by labor unrest and automation disputes. When the bombs fell, Pleasant Valley didn't escape untouched, but the real devastation came later. As Appalachia descended into chaos, raider gangs began repurposing the cabins for their own ends. The largest houses became strongholds, shanties were thrown up around an arena for blood sport, and the once luxurious lodge was gutted and left partially collapsed. Workbenches, barricades, and weapons caches replaced wine racks and fine dining. Raiders ruled the slopes, turning a retreat for the elite into a brutal settlement/raider city where only the strongest survived. Post-war, the Pleasant Valley cabins are a direct result of that transformation. The raiders' presence lingers in the form of arenas, shanties, and workshops scattered across the hillside, with evidence of their violent culture still visible in the wreckage. To a modern wanderer, the cabins offer loot, resources, and clues about how far Appalachia fell after the bombs. You won't find thriving townsfolk here, only scorched, raider remains, and the echoes of what once was. As the player, you don't exactly shape Pleasant Valley the way you can with Foundation or The Crater, but your influence comes in uncovering its history and scavenging its ruins. Exploring the collapsed lodge, looted shops, and raider-built arenas tells a story of how quickly civilization's veneer of wealth and comfort was stripped away, leaving only survival and brutality in its place. Sunnytop Ski Lanes is one of those Fallout locations where the pre-war history is almost as interesting as the post-war story. Before the bombs, Sunnytop was the northernmost ski resort in Appalachia, catering to tourists and locals who wanted to hit the slopes. It offered 4 ski runs ranging from beginner to Black Diamond, complete with chairlifts and even quirky promotions like ski jousting and 3-legged ski races. But for all its charm, the resort had a reputation for cutting corners and questionable business practices. Mix-ups like sewage contaminating the snow machines and a fee-heavy system that gouged guests on the way out left Appalachia's upper class looking down on Sunnytop. In short, it was a place built for fun, but remembered as much for its mismanagement as for its slopes. When the Great War hit, the ski lodge itself survived, but the fun times were over. In the chaos that followed, Margie and her diehards gang of raiders moved in, turning Sunnytop into their base of operations. The pristine slopes and rustic cabins became raider strongholds, while the surrounding areas were used to ambush and terrorize travelers. The diehards even worked alongside the cultists at the Palace of the Winding Path, cementing Sunnytop's reputation as a dangerous place long after the bombs. Eventually, when the diehards faded into extinction, the lodge was left open for new groups to claim, its reputation forever tied to raider brutality rather than family vacations. Today, the lifts are broken, the slopes are abandoned, and scavengers and hostile groups prowl where skiers once learned to fall with style. For us as players, it's less about influencing the future of Sunnytop and more about exploring the wreckage, picking through the remains of raider operations, discovering its quirky pre-war history, and recognizing how easily a symbol of recreation became one of survival and violence in the Fallout world.
Andale is a small settlement in the southern Capital Wasteland, and it looks like the perfect little American town. The families dress in clean pre-war clothes, they wave politely at strangers, and they brag about living in the greatest town in Virginia. But beneath that picture-perfect image lies a disturbing truth. Andale has survived for generations through cannibalism and inbreeding. The story goes back to the Great War, when 4 families sheltered in bunkers beneath Annandale. They made it through the bombs, but when their food ran out, they turned to hunting travelers who wandered too close. Over time, that practice became tradition. Outsiders were killed and eaten, while the families intermarried only with themselves. By the 23rd century, incest was the norm, and the idea of the all-American family became nothing more than a cover to lure in fresh victims. The townsfolk even justified their way of life through twisted ritual beliefs and strict roles within the family. Men hunted and worked, women tended the homes and children, and no one was allowed to break tradition. The only dissenter was Old Man Harris, who recognized the horror of what the community had become, but by then his warnings were ignored. By 2277, Andale's reputation had spread across the wasteland. Most caravans and raiders avoided the place, not knowing exactly why, but sensing that something was wrong. Nellis Air Force Base sits in the northeastern Mojave, and it's become home to the Boomers, a reclusive and heavily armed tribe descended from Vault 34. Before the war, Nellis was a major Air Force hub, launching bombers and fighters until it was struck by nukes. Radiation kept people away for decades, but by the time the boomers arrived, the worst of it had faded. They settled in, fortified the base, and made it clear that they didn't want outsiders around, using heavy artillery to drive the point home. Their reputation as isolationists with big guns spread fast across the Mojave. The boomers are surprisingly self-sufficient. They farm their own food with water pulled from Lake Mead. They make fuel from maize, and they get power from the Nellis solar array. They even use the base's old medical facilities and run a small school where kids learn both farming and how to handle heavy weapons. What really defines the boomers is their obsession with flight. They've spent years training in virtual simulators, preparing for the day that they can take to the skies. Their dream centers on the Lady in the Lake, a downed B-29 bomber resting in Lake Mead, which they believe can be restored and flown again. It's less a fantasy and more a community-wide mission that fuels their whole sense of purpose. The base itself is well structured. The old runways now serve as farmland, while the hangars hold both training simulators and the bomber parts. Barracks and huts line the western side for living space, and elders like Pearl and Loyal have their own quarters. With howitzers guarding the entrance and defenses covering every angle, getting close without permission is nearly impossible. Nellis isn't just a settlement, it's a fortress built around a dream of returning to the skies.
There are almost 30 bunker towns in Fallout Tactics, so rather than go over every single one of these top-down towns, we figured we'd cover their overall purpose and use an example like Brahmanwood. Bunker towns like Brahmanwood in Fallout Tactics weren't pre-war cities at all, but post-nuclear tribal settlements that rose from the ashes of America's ruins. Brahmanwood, sitting in the greater Chicago area, was a resource-rich village that had survived for generations without modern technology. In 2197, its relative peace shattered when raiders under Horus devastated the community, forcing them to accept the Brotherhood of Steel's protection. This protection came at quite a steep cost. Food, resources, and even their children who were taken in as Brotherhood recruits. While the Brotherhood defended them from further attacks and turned the town into a reliable source of manpower, the tribal elder remained wary of their intentions, sensing that survival had come at the price of autonomy. Over time, Brahmanwood became one of the Brotherhood's greatest contributors to its war machine, showing how post-war necessity could transform a simple tribal village into a cog in a militarized empire. There are similar narratives to other bunker towns, so just know there's a shit ton of them serving as yet another cog. Thank you guys for watching and commenting, we really do appreciate it. And remember, enjoyed time is never wasted time, and we'll see you in the next.